What if the Earth you know is only the latest draft of a much older story? Imagine peeling back the layers of time, only to discover that history is not a straight line, but a circle that has been drawn and redrawn across millions of years. The ruins we admire, the myths we tell, and even the landscapes around us may all be scars of forgotten worlds, erased by floods, fire, ice, and time itself. Consider how fragile a city is. In just a few centuries of neglect, concrete crumbles, steel corrodes, forests swallow streets whole. Now stretch that silence across 10,000 years, or 100,000, and you begin to understand how entire civilizations could rise to greatness and vanish without leaving more than whispers. Some believe these whispers are hidden in myths of Atlantis, in temples buried under sand, in maps that seem to know the shape of continents long before explorers set sail. Others argue the Earth itself remembers, storing the memory of resets in stone, ice, and ash. Tonight, we step into this possibility, not as skeptics or believers, but as travelers following faint footprints into the deep past. Welcome to Deformed History. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right, and let me know in the comments where are you watching from and what time is it for you right now. I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. To begin such a journey, we have to let go of the certainty that history as we are taught is the full story. Textbooks present a neat arc. Hunter-gatherers wandering for endless ages, suddenly discovering farming, then erecting temples, and finally raising cities that lead us step by step into the modern world. But the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and our species in its modern form has walked it for at least 200,000. If civilization as we know it only appears in the last 6,000, that leaves a staggering silence behind us. What filled that silence? Were our ancestors truly living in the same way for unthinkable spans of time, repeating the same simple routines, waiting for an invisible spark? Or is it possible that entire stories have already been written, then erased by forces far larger than we imagine? When we talk about resets, it is not a button pressed, not an instant erasure like wiping a chalkboard. The planet erases slowly, but with unstoppable strength. A city left alone today would vanish quickly. Vines would creep into windows, roots splitting asphalt, rain carving away foundations. In a few centuries, it would be a ruin. In a few millennia, almost nothing. At another ice age, when glaciers grind continents like massive bulldozers, and that city would be ground to dust beneath mountains of ice. The thought is chilling, because it means that if civilizations had existed in deep time, we should not expect gleaming ruins waiting to be found. We should expect fragments, stones shifted out of place, myths carried in memory, strange anomalies that refuse to fit the clean chart of progress. Some of these fragments already exist. High in Turkey lies a site called Göbekli Tepe. Archaeologists agree it is at least 12,000 years old, far older than the pyramids, older even than agriculture as we define it. And yet here we find massive carved pillars arranged in circles, decorated with reliefs of animals, symbols, and abstract shapes. To build such a place, people had to quarry stone weighing many tons, transport it, shape it with precision, and organize hundreds of workers. According to the conventional timeline, they should have been no more than simple hunter-gatherers. but the stones say otherwise. The site is like a voice breaking through the silence, whispering that people of that age were capable of more than our story allows. Off the coast of Japan, beneath the waves at Yonaguni, lies another puzzle. Divers discovered a vast structure of terraces, steps, and flat platforms. Some argue it is natural rock shaped by the sea, but the sharp angles and regular patterns suggest human hands. If it was built, it must have been built more than 10,000 years ago, before rising seas at the end of the last ice age swallowed it whole. In India, submerged ruins near Dwarka echo ancient texts that spoke of a radiant city lost beneath the sea. Pottery, walls, and tools retrieved from the depths suggest that people once lived there, long before official history allows. Across continents, legends tell of drowned worlds, and the sea still guards secrets that may prove those stories true. The mainstream view often resists these possibilities. It says anomalies are mistakes, coincidences, or misinterpretations. But when so many whispers rise from the earth and sea, the pattern becomes hard to ignore. If resets occurred, if the earth itself swept civilizations away in cycles of fire, flood, and ice, then what we find today is exactly what we should expect. Fragments, outliers, mysteries that make us pause. Consider myths. They are often dismissed as fantasies, moral tales invented to explain the unknown. Yet across cultures separated by oceans and centuries, the same themes return. Floods covering the land, fire from the sky, darkness lasting days or years, worlds destroyed only to be reborn. In Mesopotamia, the story of Utnapishtim tells of a flood so great the gods themselves sent it, and one man survives by building a boat. In the Bible, the tale of Noah echoes the same structure. In India, Manu receives a warning from a divine fish and builds a vessel to endure the rising waters. In Greece, Deucalion and Pyrrha survive the drowning of the world. Among the Maya of Central America, earlier ages of humanity are said to have been destroyed by water before a new one began. It is possible to believe these cultures all imagined the same story independently, but another possibility is that they remembered. Survivors may have carried fragments of real catastrophe forward, shaping them into stories to explain and preserve what they had endured. Geology supports this. At the end of the last ice age, massive sheets of ice melted, sending sea levels more than 100 meters higher. Coastlines flooded, plains became oceans, and any settlement built near the shore would have been drowned. Imagine our world today without New York, London, Shanghai, or Tokyo. Almost every great city of humanity sits at the edge of the sea. If a global flood came tomorrow, most of civilization would vanish into the waves. Survivors far inland would tell stories to their children about cities swallowed by the ocean, about ships carrying the last of their people, about fire and ice that came before the water. Thousands of years later, when new civilizations rose, those stories would be myths, yet rooted in real events. Even the earth itself remembers. In its layers of rock, in the ice cores drilled from Greenland and Antarctica, we see the scars of sudden changes, layers of ash from supervolcanoes, thin bands of rare metals from asteroid impacts, sudden plunges of temperature recorded in bubbles of ancient air. Around 12,800 years ago, during a period called the Younger Dryas, the climate suddenly froze again just as it was warming. Some believe this was caused by a comet impact that ignited massive fires across continents. If people lived then in ways more complex than we assume, their world would have been devastated overnight. The silence that follows in the record may not mean nothing happened. It may mean everything happened, and little survived. The Neanderthals tell another part of the story. They were close relatives of ours, living across Europe and Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. Strong, intelligent, they made tools, buried their dead, perhaps even created art. Then they vanished. Explanations vary: competition, disease, climate. But their disappearance is a reminder that entire branches of humanity can be wiped away. If resets have shaped life before, then the loss of Neanderthals may have been part of that rhythm. They left behind only fragments of their DNA, carried quietly in us. It is unsettling to realize that disappearance is more common in history than survival. Species vanish, civilizations collapse, landscapes transform, and what remains is silence. Yet this silence is not empty. It is a veil, and behind it lie stories we cannot yet read. To walk among ruins, to hold an artifact that should not exist, to read myths that repeat across oceans, is to brush against that veil and sense what may lie beyond. The question is not whether the earth has reset. It has, again and again. The question is whether humanity has been swept away with it, not once, but many times, leaving us as the latest to rise from the ashes of forgotten worlds. As we step into this possibility, the world around us begins to feel less permanent. Mountains that seem eternal are shifting even now. Rivers carve valleys, seas claim coastlines, forests rise and fall. If we look closely, we see that nothing endures untouched. The earth is restless, and we are only tenants in its vast cycles. Our cities may seem mighty, but they too rest on fragile ground. In the grand rhythm of the planet, we are a brief flare, perhaps bright, perhaps fleeting, but never beyond the reach of resets. To understand why the idea of resets feels both haunting and strangely believable, we only need to watch what nature does in the present. A volcano erupts in Indonesia, and for weeks the sky turns gray, crops fail, and ash drifts across continents. A tsunami strikes without warning, and entire towns are reduced to memories in hours. An earthquake shakes the foundations of a modern city, and what took decades to build collapses in seconds. These are glimpses of power on a local scale, moments that remind us the earth is not a steady stage beneath our feet, but a living force capable of rewriting everything. Stretch that power across centuries or millennia, and the possibility of whole civilizations erased begins to feel less like fantasy and more like inevitability. Scientists speak of mass extinctions, those rare moments when life itself is reset. 65 million years ago, an asteroid slammed into what is now Mexico, carving out the Chicxulub crater. The sky filled with dust, the sun disappeared, and the dinosaurs, who had ruled for more than 100 million years, vanished. In their absence, mammals rose, a reminder that destruction and renewal are two sides of the same coin. Much later, around 74,000 years ago, the Toba supervolcano erupted in Indonesia with such violence that ash blanketed much of the globe. The sun dimmed, the climate cooled, and human populations may have been reduced to a few thousand individuals scattered across Africa and Asia. Genetic studies suggest we are the descendants of that bottleneck, survivors of a near-extinction event that could easily have ended the human story before it began. That was a reset, not total erasure, but a narrowing, a reduction to embers from which our age eventually reignited. If such events happened within the span of human existence, how many more may have struck earlier? The Earth's record is filled with cycles of fire and ice, of seas rising and falling. Each time conditions shifted, landscapes were remade. Rivers changed their paths, deserts swallowed fertile valleys, and coastlines disappeared. Imagine a thriving society on the shores of a great lake that suddenly drained away when ice dams broke, leaving behind only dry basin and scattered debris. Imagine a culture flourishing on a coastal plain that is now drowned beneath the Atlantic or Pacific. Its cities turned to reefs, its memory scattered among distant myths. For every Atlantis told by Plato, there could have been dozens we will never know, lost beneath the sea or ground to dust beneath glaciers. What makes this idea unsettling is how fragile our own achievements appear when placed on this scale. Think of our cities, monuments of glass and steel, highways stretching like veins across continents, satellites circling above. It feels indestructible in daily life, but in deep time, it is paper thin. In just a few centuries of neglect, nature would reclaim skyscrapers, forests would blanket highways, and rivers would wash away bridges. In 10,000 years, little would remain recognizable. In 100,000, even less. If our world ended today, future archaeologists might find only fragments, a shard of glass turned to sand, a trace of chemical residue in soil, a lonely monolith half buried in sediment. They would wonder if we existed at all, much as we wonder about those who may have come before. There is a strange comfort in realizing we are not the first to walk this path. Myths across the globe speak of earlier ages destroyed and reborn. In Hindu cosmology, time unfolds in cycles called yugas, each one ending in collapse and renewal. The Aztecs believed they lived under the fifth sun, with 4 previous worlds destroyed by water, fire, and darkness. Norse myths describe Ragnarok, when the world burns and then rises again green and fertile. Native American traditions tell of endings by ice, by fire, by flood. These stories differ in detail, but echo in structure. Destruction followed by survival, survival followed by renewal. What if these are not just parables, but cultural memories, ways of passing down the story of resets so future generations would not forget? When archaeologists uncover ruins like those at Göbekli Tepe, they see puzzle pieces that don't fit the official timeline. 12,000 years ago, people were supposed to be wandering bands of hunters. Yet the stones tell a different story, one of organization, skill, and vision. When divers explore Yonaguni, or Dwarka, they find shapes and artifacts that should not exist beneath the waves. And when old maps surface showing Antarctica free of ice, they raise questions that should not have answers. Mainstream history often places these anomalies in a box labeled mystery or coincidence. But to view them through the lens of resets is to see them differently. They are not mistakes. They are remnants, broken echoes of earlier cycles that managed against all odds to survive long enough for us to find them. The silence of the past is not blank. It is thick with possibility. 200,000 years of anatomically modern humans, yet only the last few thousand filled with writing, cities, and monuments. Are we to believe that nothing of significance happened for the first 98% of our existence? Or is it more likely that stories have been lost, erased by flood and fire, leaving only fragments that confuse us? Consider how myths of floods align with geology. At the end of the last ice age, seas rose dramatically, drowning coastlines across the world. Those who lived there would have seen their entire world swallowed, a trauma so deep it became legend. Consider how myths of fire align with history. Volcanoes like Toba or Thera erupting, filling skies with ash, burning land and people alike. Consider how myths of darkness match with science, comet impacts and volcanic winters that blotted out the sun. Myth and geology speak the same language, one in story, the other in stone. And then there is the question of sudden leaps. Archaeologists note that for tens of thousands of years, stone tools remained simple and unchanging. Then, around 40,000 years ago, art, music, and advanced tools appear suddenly. Why then? Why not earlier? Some explain it as a genetic or cultural revolution, but others wonder whether it was the reawakening of memory after a reset. Survivors rebuilding, rediscovering skills and knowledge that had once existed, sparking what looks like sudden genius, but may have been recovery. The same pattern repeats with agriculture 10,000 years ago, appearing in multiple places at once, as though people remembered fragments of farming rather than inventing it from nothing. The rise of cities soon after feels equally abrupt, from silence to structure, from absence to abundance. Viewed through the cycle of resets, these leaps become part of a rhythm: destruction, survival, rebuilding. To look at history this way is to see it not as a ladder, but as a spiral. Each age climbs, falls, and climbs again, circling around the same themes with new expression. Civilizations rise, they flourish, they collapse, and from their ashes another rises, sometimes carrying fragments of the old, sometimes starting anew. It is a humbling perspective, because it means our place in the story is not guaranteed. We are not the culmination of history, but a chapter in a book that has been rewritten countless times. Our skyscrapers may be as temporary as the stone pillars of forgotten temples. Our maps may one day confuse those who come after. Our myths may be their only clue that we once lived. And yet, within that humility lies a strange resilience. Each reset does not end the story, but begins another. Life returns, people adapt, cultures rebuild. We are not here because the world has been stable. We are here because it has been unstable, and because our ancestors, like countless others before them, survived. If Earth has been reset many times, then our existence is not an accident but a testament to endurance. The silence behind us may not be emptiness, but the echo of forgotten worlds. And in listening for that echo, we may begin to understand not only where we came from, but what it means to live in the fragile and fleeting present. If silence is the veil over forgotten worlds, then ruins are the threads that pierce through it. They rise unexpectedly out of the ground, often in places that seem impossible for their time. To walk among such stones is to feel both awe and confusion, as though you have stumbled into a message carved by hands that knew a different truth. One of the most haunting examples is Stonehenge, standing on the windswept plains of southern England. Great slabs of rock arranged in circles, aligned so precisely with the solstices that the sun rises and sets in perfect harmony with the stones. According to the conventional timeline, these were Neolithic farmers, simple people with crude tools. Yet their monument is not crude. It is a calendar in stone, a place of ceremony, a structure demanding immense planning and knowledge of astronomy. Why did they build it? How did they move stones weighing dozens of tons across miles of landscape without wheels or iron tools? We may never know, but the very existence of Stonehenge hints that fragments of knowledge can endure, passed down across resets, leaving us a reminder that people long ago were not ignorant, but ingenious. Even more enigmatic is Puma Punku in the Bolivian highlands, part of the Tiwanaku culture. Here lie blocks of stone so massive that even modern machinery would struggle to lift them. Their surfaces are cut with astonishing precision, right angles so sharp they feel mechanical, interlocking shapes that fit together like puzzle pieces. To see them is to feel as though you are looking at something out of time, a remnant of technology that should not exist in its era. Scholars debate endlessly. Were the tools more advanced than we admit, or is our understanding of their methods incomplete? Some argue that primitive hammerstones and patience were enough. Others look at the near machine-like quality of the cuts and wonder whether knowledge was inherited from an earlier age. What makes Puma Punku so unsettling is not just its scale, but its defiance of the narrative that places complexity only in recent millennia. And then there are the pyramids. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid of Giza rises with such exactness that it still humbles engineers. Its sides align almost perfectly to the cardinal directions. Its base is nearly square to within fractions of an inch. It encodes mathematical relationships, proportions that suggest knowledge of geometry and perhaps even of Earth itself. To imagine such precision emerging from a culture supposedly just discovering writing stretches belief. And yet the pyramid stands, massive and silent, its builders' names mostly lost, its purpose still debated. Some say it was a tomb, others a temple, still others believe it held knowledge in stone form, an archive meant to last when everything else would crumble. Whatever the truth, its endurance across thousands of years makes it a beacon, whispering that human hands have always reached for the eternal, even when surrounded by the fragile. Travel eastward in thought to Turkey again, and Göbekli Tepe returns to the story, that place where hunter-gatherers supposedly came together not to farm, but to build. Great T-shaped pillars, carved with animals both real and mythical, arranged in circles that seem designed for ritual and gathering. Its builders buried it deliberately, as if to preserve it for someone in the future. When archaeologists uncovered it, they realized it was twice as old as Stonehenge, older than agriculture itself. The conventional timeline could not easily hold it, so it became an anomaly. But seen through the idea of resets, it is not an anomaly at all. It is the faint voice of an earlier cycle, preserved by chance, telling us that people had already risen to heights of cooperation and imagination long before history says they should have. What all these places share is the sense that they do not belong neatly in the box of progress. They appear suddenly, fully formed, as if knowledge dropped into the hands of their builders rather than slowly developing. They echo the pattern of leaps and silences we see elsewhere. Long stretches where nothing changes, then sudden bursts of innovation, then collapse. Perhaps these are the points where memory breaks through after a reset, where fragments of forgotten ages surface long enough to shape stone before fading again. If so, then ruins are not simply relics of one culture, but messages across cycles, enduring monuments built to outlast resets, to remind future ages of what was once possible. Beneath the waves, the story grows even stranger. Along coastlines across the world lie drowned ruins, Pavlopetri off Greece, a city 5,000 years old now resting a few meters below the sea. Dwarka in India, its ancient streets and walls hidden beneath water but remembered in ancient texts. Yonaguni in Japan, vast terraces whose sharpness seems unnatural. When the ice sheets melted 12,000 years ago, seas rose by more than 100 meters, swallowing vast tracts of land. If our great coastal cities were drowned tomorrow, what would remain in 10,000 years? Perhaps fragments of skyscraper foundations. Perhaps nothing at all. The underwater ruins we find may be exactly that. Fragments of earlier coastal societies erased by the rising ocean. To see them is to glimpse Atlantis in every direction, not as a single mythical island, but as countless real settlements swallowed in a slow-motion catastrophe. Myths of Atlantis themselves carry power because they mirror this truth. Plato's story describes a great island civilization destroyed in a single day and night, swallowed by the sea. Scholars debate whether he invented it, but the tale resonates because it feels possible. We know seas can rise, volcanoes can erupt, earthquakes can sink coastlines. Atlantis is compelling because it is not a fantasy. It is a memory dressed as a myth, a symbol of fragility. Across the Pacific, Polynesian traditions recall islands that once existed but sank. In the Caribbean, legends tell of sunken cities. In India, Dwarka was remembered long after it was gone. Everywhere, the ocean whispers the same message. What is built can vanish. What vanishes can return only as story. And then there are the maps, perhaps the strangest fragments of all. In 1513, an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis drew a chart of the known world. On it appear coastlines that match not only Europe and Africa, but South America with surprising accuracy. Even stranger, at the bottom is a southern landmass shaped like Antarctica, but shown without ice. Antarctica has been covered in ice for thousands of years, and official history says it was not even discovered until the 1800s. Piri Reis himself admitted he compiled his map from older sources. If those sources were ancient, who drew them, and how did they know what lay beneath the ice? Other maps echo the same puzzle. Orontius Phineas in 1531, showing Antarctica's rivers and mountains beneath the ice sheet. Boache in 1737, depicting subglacial features modern radar only confirmed in the 20th century. Coincidence is possible, but when multiple maps carry the same knowledge, the possibility of inherited memory emerges. Perhaps they are fragments from seafaring civilizations erased long ago, their charts copied and recopied until they reached hands that did not understand them fully. These anomalies, ruins, maps, myths, form a constellation. Alone, they can be explained away as chance or error. Together they suggest a pattern, the outline of cycles hidden beneath the official story. They hint that humanity may have walked this path before, may have built, explored, mapped, and then fallen, leaving us only their scattered footprints. And if that is true, then our own age is not the first, but merely the latest, a fragile layer on top of countless others. To stand before such mysteries is to feel the ground shift beneath your feet. The narrative of steady progress begins to dissolve, replaced by something more uncertain, more fragile, but also more wondrous. For it means we are not alone in time. Others may have stood where we stand, looked at the stars, carved stone, and asked the same questions. Who are we? Where do we come from? How many times has the earth begun again? The silence between ruins may hold the answer, and in that silence, we begin to hear the faint heartbeat of forgotten worlds. The Earth itself is a storyteller, though its language is not words but layers. To read geology is to turn the pages of a book written in stone, each stratum a line in the chronicle of deep time. Some layers are calm, fine sediments, gentle deposits of rivers and lakes. Others are violent, marked by thick bands of ash from volcanoes, by abrupt shifts in fossils, by traces of metals that only arrive when asteroids strike. Each of these interruptions is a reminder that the world has not been steady. It has lurched, collapsed, and reshaped itself many times, often in ways that would have made survival nearly impossible for any society caught in the storm. One of the most striking patterns in this record is the cycle of ice ages. For millions of years, the climate has swung between long periods of cold, when vast ice sheets spread over continents, and shorter warm intervals like the one we live in now. During those cold periods, kilometers of ice buried North America and Europe, carving valleys, scraping mountains bare, pushing boulders hundreds of miles before dropping them as the glaciers melted. Seas retreated, exposing continental shelves. When the ice receded, seas rose again, drowning coastlines and reshaping the map. Imagine civilizations thriving on those now vanished coasts, their cities swallowed by water as the glaciers melted. If we know that nearly all our modern great cities cling to the edges of oceans, it is easy to picture the same pattern repeating in ages long gone. The end of the last ice age, 12,000 years ago, raised sea levels by more than 100 meters, enough to erase entire nations if it happened today. But the ice was not the only force. Around 12,800 years ago, as the planet warmed, the climate suddenly plunged back into a 1,000-year freeze, known as the Younger Dryas. Ice cores tell the story: a sharp drop in temperature, evidence of widespread fires, abrupt changes in ecosystems. Some scientists argue this was triggered by a comet impact, shattering in the atmosphere and igniting massive wildfires across continents. The charred remains in soil layers seem to whisper of disaster. If any advanced society lived at that time, it would have been devastated, reduced to survivors clinging to whatever they could salvage. To us, it would appear as though civilization began shortly afterward, when in truth it may have been reborn. Further back, the scars grow deeper. The Chicxulub impact 65 million years ago ended the age of dinosaurs in a single fiery instant. More recently, 74,000 years ago, the Toba supervolcano erupted with a force thousands of times greater than any eruption in recorded history. Ash clouds dimmed the sun, the atmosphere cooled, and humanity itself may have been reduced to only a few thousand survivors scattered across Africa. That we exist at all is proof that the line of life is tenacious, but it is also fragile. A slightly greater eruption, a larger asteroid, a deeper freeze, and we might not be here to wonder. Each of these events is not just catastrophe, but reset, a clearing of the stage so new actors could step forward. Geology also records smaller but equally profound disruptions. Flood basalts in Siberia and India testify to eruptions that lasted not days, but millions of years, pouring out lava that covered entire regions, releasing gases that suffocated ecosystems. Earthquakes have lifted coastlines in minutes. Tsunamis have swept across oceans, leaving debris from one continent on the shores of another. All of this is written into stone, but rarely into our cultural memory. We are brief, and the earth is vast. Yet in the myths of fire and flood, we can almost hear the echo of people who lived through smaller versions of these cataclysms. If the ground beneath us is unstable, the skies above us are no kinder. Asteroids still pass close, comets still streak by. We live in a lull between impacts, a calm stretch in which it is easy to forget that the heavens can strike without warning. A rock only a few hundred meters wide could erase a city. One a few kilometers across could collapse global civilization. The geological record shows us such strikes have happened again and again. If civilizations flourished in earlier ages, the sky may have been their end, just as it nearly was for the dinosaurs. Survivors would scatter, rebuild, and leave behind fragments to puzzle over, much as we now puzzle over ruins that seem too old or too advanced for their place. In this light, history begins to look less like a march and more like a rhythm. Civilizations rise in the spaces between catastrophe, building as high as time allows before the earth shakes, the sea swallows, or the sky falls. Survivors carry fragments forward, often in stories, sometimes in stone. Then, when the world steadies, they begin again. It is a rhythm we rarely acknowledge because we live inside one beat of the cycle, convinced it is the only one. But the stones and ice cores tell us otherwise. They remind us that the earth itself does not promise continuity. It promises only change. What makes this idea powerful is how it reframes the anomalies we see in the archaeological record. When we find a leap forward, like the sudden appearance of cave art 40,000 years ago, we no longer need to ask why humanity waited so long. Perhaps we did not wait at all. Perhaps we had created before, but those creations were lost in a reset, and what we see is the reawakening of memory. When we find ruins beneath the sea, we no longer need to call them legends. They may be precisely what they appear, the drowned remains of coastal societies erased by melting ice. When we find maps that should not exist, we can consider them relics of seafarers from a cycle before ours, their knowledge preserved only in fragments. This is not speculation pulled from fantasy. It is an interpretation of the evidence the earth offers. The layers of stone show resets. The myths of humanity echo resets. The anomalies of archaeology hint at resets. The silence of vast stretches of time practically demands them. If our age can be nearly erased by a single catastrophe, why not earlier ones? If survivors of Toba carried us through a bottleneck of near extinction, why not survivors of other, older resets carrying fragments we no longer recognize? What humbles us is the realization that even our greatest achievements may vanish as thoroughly as those of forgotten ages. Skyscrapers will rust, satellites will fall, digital records will disappear with the decay of servers and wires. In 10,000 years, the clearest mark of our existence may be a few scattered monuments of stone, perhaps the pyramids, perhaps Mount Rushmore, perhaps some hidden vault of preserved knowledge if it survives. And to those who come after, if they rise, we too may seem like a myth, a story of gods who flew in machines, who mapped the stars, who vanished when the earth shifted again. To walk through the record of the earth is to feel how temporary we are. Yet it is also to feel wonder, because resets do not only destroy, they renew. Life has returned every time. Humanity has endured every time. The silence is full of losses, but also of beginnings. To recognize that is not to despair, but to marvel at the resilience that has brought us here, fragile though it may be. The earth has been reset again and again, and still we stand, listening to its story in stone. Among the most curious puzzles of human history is how entire cultures seem to appear fully formed, only to vanish just as suddenly. If civilization were truly a single upward climb, we would expect a slow gradient, a gentle slope of progress. Yet when we peer into the record, we see abrupt beginnings and unexplained endings, as though humanity were sprinting forward, tripping, and then rising again from the ground with fragments of forgotten memory. Consider the Indus Valley civilization, stretching across what is now India and Pakistan more than 4,000 years ago. Its cities, like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, were laid out with straight streets, drainage systems, standardized bricks, and hints of centralized planning. Their culture created seals with mysterious symbols, traded with distant lands, and seemed to possess a complex social order. And then, without clear explanation, it dissolved. The cities were abandoned, their language untranslatable, their memory fading into silence. The Maya in Central America tell another version of the same rhythm. For centuries, they built monumental cities of stone, complete with pyramids, observatories, ball courts, and precise calendars that tracked not only the sun and moon, but the motions of planets. Their achievements in mathematics and astronomy rivaled those of later civilizations half a world away. And yet, in a span of only a few generations, their great cities were left to the jungle. Scholars debate the cause: drought, warfare, disease, political collapse. But the truth may be that multiple pressures converged at once. Whatever the reasons, the outcome was the same. A culture that had scaled such heights became a whisper beneath the trees, its knowledge scattered among surviving communities. Even the Roman Empire, so often invoked as a symbol of permanence, collapsed into fragments. For centuries, its roads, aqueducts, armies, and laws bound Europe, the Mediterranean, and parts of the Middle East into a vast network. But internal conflict, economic strain, and waves of invasions eventually overwhelmed it. What had seemed eternal fell apart, leaving ruins we marvel at today. From one perspective, Rome is proof that collapse is not only ancient, but recurring. If it happened in the last 2,000 years, why not in ages far older, now hidden beneath water or stone? But when we extend the scope further back, into prehistory, the rhythm becomes even more dramatic. For tens of thousands of years, humans left little evidence beyond simple stone tools. Then suddenly, around 40,000 years ago, came an explosion of creativity. Cave paintings in Lascaux and Chauvet, delicate carvings of figurines, bone flutes capable of playing music, elaborate burial rituals suggesting symbolic thought. Why did this leap happen then, and not earlier? Some propose a genetic change, a shift in cognition. Others point to the development of language. But another possibility is that this was a recovery, the survivors of an earlier reset rediscovering skills and expression that had once been lost. To us, it looks like a sudden dawn, but it may have been a rebirth. The pattern repeats around 10,000 years ago, when agriculture appears almost simultaneously in multiple regions: the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia, the valleys of China, the highlands of Mesoamerica, the Nile, and sub-Saharan Africa. Farming did not emerge in just one place and spread slowly. It appeared in several, as though people across the globe were rediscovering the same forgotten skill, adapting it to their local conditions. Seeds planted, animals domesticated, surplus stored, societies transformed. Within only a few millennia, great cities emerged, from Uruk in Mesopotamia to the ancient settlements along the Yellow River. The suddenness of this shift raises questions. Did humans really spend 90% of their existence ignoring the possibility of planting seeds, only to discover it almost at once in far-flung regions? Or were fragments of agricultural knowledge carried through oral traditions, waiting for the right climate after the Ice Age to spark again? And then there is the leap into cities and states. In Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and China, great civilizations appear seemingly out of nowhere, complete with writing systems, monumental architecture, legal codes, and astronomy. The Sumerians gave us cuneiform, Egyptians raised pyramids, the Indus built planned cities, and China's early dynasties charted the skies. Archaeology shows us little in the way of a long, gradual build-up. Instead, advanced culture appears suddenly, as though knowledge had been condensed and released in bursts. To view this through the lens of resets is to see the rhythm again. Silence, leap, collapse, silence, leap. Of course, mainstream history explains these leaps as the natural result of human ingenuity, triggered by stable climates, growing populations, and the need for organization. But the gaps remain puzzling. Why the long quiet before the sudden noise? Why the abrupt flourishing followed by disappearance? Why the repeating structure across different places and times? If resets occurred, the answers come into focus. Each collapse scattered survivors into smaller groups. Over generations, knowledge faded until only fragments survived in memory and myth. Then, when conditions stabilized, those fragments returned, sparking new beginnings. What looks like invention may sometimes be reinvention. What looks like birth may actually be recovery. Even today, the fragility of knowledge is easy to see. Imagine if tomorrow global infrastructure collapsed, electricity failed, cities were abandoned, and populations scattered. In a few generations, children might grow up hearing stories of machines that flew in the sky, or screens that glowed with moving images. Without the networks to preserve and transmit knowledge, advanced skills would fade quickly. A farmer who knows how to plant by hand would thrive, while an engineer who knows how to design a computer chip might find his knowledge useless. In time, stories of airplanes might sound like myths of flying gods, stories of satellites like stars that humans once controlled. And yet, if survivors rebuilt, fragments of those ideas might return centuries later, reshaped as new discoveries. That is how resets disguise themselves as miracles, because what is rediscovered feels new, even if it is only memory reawakened. Archaeology often reveals this disguise in the form of anomalies, artifacts or structures that do not fit the expected timeline. An advanced tool found in a layer of earth that should be too old. A map showing knowledge long before it should have been possible. A myth that mirrors geological events later confirmed by science. Each anomaly on its own may be dismissed, but together they form a chorus whispering of cycles. We are told to treat them as curiosities, but they may be fragments of a deeper story. If resets are real, then history becomes less about progress and more about resilience. Each leap forward is not the first time, but the latest attempt. Each collapse is not the end, but the clearing of the stage for another beginning. Humanity may not be walking a straight road from caves to skyscrapers, but a spiral path winding through destruction and renewal. We are the inheritors of countless recoveries, the children of survivors who carried fragments of memory across the silence. To see our past this way is both humbling and empowering. It means we are not unique, but we are also not fragile illusions. We are the latest flame in a chain that has burned and been rekindled countless times. What lingers is the question: how many times has this happened? How many civilizations rose and fell before the pages of our history began? How many myths are memories? How many ruins are remnants? How many silences are veils hiding entire worlds? We may never know the full number, but in the rhythm of leaps and collapses the answer whispers. The earth has reset again and again, and in each reset, humanity has stumbled, fallen, and risen once more. To live now is to live in one of those fragile spaces between catastrophes, one more chance to build, one more chance to endure, one more chapter in a book whose earlier pages are lost. And perhaps that is what makes the story of resets so powerful. Not that they erase, but that they remind us of the strength hidden in survival, the persistence that carries memory across even the darkest silences. If myths are the voices of survivors, then maps may be their drawings, sketches of a world long forgotten, carried forward in fragments until they reached later hands. At first glance, maps seem ordinary, tools of navigation, records of coastlines, guides for travelers. But scattered among the charts of history are a few that do not belong, maps that seem to hold knowledge centuries or even millennia too early. These are not easily dismissed, for they show details we should not know, details only visible when the Earth was different from the world we recognize today. The most famous is the Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral. On its surface, it looks like many maps of its time, Europe and Africa clearly outlined, the edge of South America curling into the Atlantic. But in its southern reaches, where cartographers of that era had no business knowing anything, lies a landmass shaped like Antarctica. More astonishing, the coastline is drawn as ice-free, revealing rivers and contours that modern science only confirmed with radar in the 20th century. How could a 16th century admiral chart features buried beneath ice for thousands of years? Piri Reis himself explained that he compiled his work from older sources, charts and documents passed down, copied and recopied. If those sources were truly ancient, then we may be glimpsing the inherited knowledge of a civilization that mapped the world before the ice returned, a memory etched in parchment long after the people themselves had vanished. This was not an isolated curiosity. The Orontius Phineus map of 1531 also depicted Antarctica, again without its thick ice covering. The Boache map of 1737 showed rivers and mountains beneath Antarctica's ice sheet that were only confirmed centuries later. To dismiss one map as coincidence is easy. To explain away a series of them is harder. Did several cartographers all imagine the same impossible knowledge? Or were they all drawing from a deeper source, a lineage of maps copied from charts made in an age we no longer remember? Other anomalies appear elsewhere. South America, for instance, is often shown on early maps with surprising accuracy, long before explorers had charted its full coast. Rivers are drawn where they should be, mountain ranges outlined where no European had traveled. Some of this could be luck or the skill of guesswork. But when maps echo details across generations, accuracy in places that should have been unknown, the possibility of older knowledge becomes harder to ignore. Imagine a civilization skilled in navigation, charting coastlines as far as their ships could carry them. Imagine their maps copied by others, preserved in fragments through resets, eventually finding their way into the hands of early modern cartographers who did not fully grasp what they had inherited. The sea itself may hold the key to this mystery, because if ancient civilizations existed, they almost certainly built along the coasts. Nearly all of humanity's great cities today stand beside oceans and rivers where trade and food are abundant. If the same was true in earlier ages, then the rising seas at the end of the last ice age would have swallowed their settlements. In just a few thousand years, the waters rose by more than 100 meters, enough to drown vast tracts of land. Imagine the coastlines of today extended dozens of miles further, broad, fertile plains where cities may have stood. When the glaciers melted, those lands vanished beneath the waves, taking their history with them. And yet sometimes the sea gives fragments back. Off the coast of India, in the Gulf of Kambat, sonar surveys revealed patterns on the seabed that looked like streets, walls, and foundations. Divers recovered artifacts, pottery, beads, tools, that suggested human activity thousands of years older than the accepted timeline of Indian civilization. Near Greece, the sunken city of Pavlopetri lies preserved just a few meters underwater, a settlement at least 5,000 years old. Its streets, courtyards, and walls are still visible, showing us what a coastal community once looked like before the sea rose. If a shallow city like Pavlopetri can survive millennia beneath the waves, what of the deeper ruins still hidden, too far below for easy exploration? In Japan, the Yonaguni monument still sparks fierce debate. Some insist it is nothing but natural rock, shaped by currents into terraces and platforms. Others see in its sharp angles and broad steps the unmistakable work of human design. If it is man-made, it must date back more than 10,000 years to a time when that land was still above the sea. For those who dive among its massive blocks, it feels like a city lost, a reminder that the ocean guards more than it reveals. Legends echo this truth. Plato's tale of Atlantis is the most famous, an island civilization shown to have been advanced and wealthy, destroyed in a single day and night when the sea swallowed it. Scholars debate whether Plato invented the story as allegory or retold a memory passed down through Egyptian priests. But Atlantis is far from unique. In India, texts describe Dwarka, a city built by the god Krishna, radiant and magnificent before it, too, was lost beneath the waves. Polynesian traditions recall islands that once existed but sank. Caribbean myths tell of cities swallowed by the ocean. Across the globe, the same story repeats. A flourishing place, a sudden flood, and the sea claiming everything. When stories align with geology, they gain weight. We know the seas did rise. We know coasts were drowned. To people living then, it must have felt like the end of the world. Entire homelands vanished in the span of generations. Survivors fled inland, carrying their memories, shaping them into myths. Over time, the names changed, details shifted, but the structure endured. The ocean rose, the land was lost, and people remembered. Today we treat those myths as imagination, but perhaps they are oral histories stretched across time. The voices of those who watched their world vanish beneath the waves. Modern technology is only beginning to explore the ocean floor. Sonar scans, submersibles, and remote-operated vehicles allow us to map areas once inaccessible. Yet most of the seafloor remains unexplored, a vast library of hidden landscapes and perhaps hidden ruins. If resets erased coastal civilizations, their remains would be down there, waiting, preserved in darkness and salt. The scale of what might be lost is staggering. Imagine if tomorrow the seas rose by 100 meters. New York, London, Shanghai, Mumbai, Sydney, Rio de Janeiro, all gone. Future generations, if they rebuilt, might remember us only as myths, our towers as mountains of glass, our plains as birds of fire. If they found fragments of our maps, they might marvel at how we knew coastlines now hidden beneath the waves. They might call us gods, or they might dismiss the fragments as fantasy. We would become what Atlantis is to us, a symbol of fragility. The deeper truth is that water is one of the greatest erasers of memory. Stone may endure beneath soil, deserts may preserve ruins beneath sand, but the ocean swallows almost everything. Timber rots, metal corrodes, fabric dissolves. Even stone erodes faster beneath currents than on land. What survives are the hardest fragments, carved blocks, potsherds, maybe statues. Enough to confuse, not enough to complete the story. And so when divers find steps carved into rock, or when sonar reveals the outline of streets beneath silt, we glimpse pieces without context. We are left to wonder whether we are looking at a natural quirk, a misplaced artifact, or the last breath of a forgotten age. To see maps, ruins, and myths together is to see a thread. A reminder that we may not be the first to chart the seas, not the first to build cities along coasts, not the first to lose them when the ocean rose. Our maps may one day be fragments, our skyscrapers reefs, our legends the only memory of who we were. The story of resets is not only written in stone and ice, it is drawn on paper, whispered in tales, and hidden beneath the restless waters of the sea. The ocean may guard its secrets, but the land, too, carries reminders of forgotten worlds, reminders built not by nature, but by human hands. Across the globe rise megaliths, massive stones shaped and arranged in ways that still defy simple explanation. They stand silent, yet they speak volumes, not only about the skill of their builders, but about the persistence of knowledge across cycles. To see them is to feel the weight of time pressing down, a whisper that perhaps these structures were not merely ceremonial, but vessels of memory meant to endure when everything else would vanish. Take Stonehenge again, that circle of monoliths on the English plain. For centuries, people have wondered why it was built. Was it a temple to the sun, a burial ground, a calendar to track seasons? Its alignment with the solstices suggests careful astronomical knowledge, a way of marking time not just for ritual, but for survival. Farming societies depended on knowing when to plant, when to harvest, when the seasons would shift. Yet Stonehenge was more than practical. It was monumental. Moving stones weighing up to 25 tons over miles of land without wheels or iron tools was not the act of a desperate people struggling to survive, but of a community capable of cooperation, vision, and a sense of continuity that stretched beyond individual lives. It was as if the builders wanted to speak across ages to say, "We were here, and we knew the sky. Journey to Bolivia, high in the Andes, and you will find Puma Punku. Here the stones are larger still, some exceeding 100 tons, cut with precision so sharp that they interlock like the pieces of a giant puzzle." Some blocks contain grooves and right angles that resemble the work of machine tools, though official explanations point to simple stone hammers and sand abrasion. To stand among these blocks is to feel the unsettling possibility that knowledge existed then that should not have. If resets occurred, perhaps Puma Punku was built by people carrying fragments of forgotten engineering, remnants of a skill once widespread, but now lost. To us, the site is a riddle. To its builders, it may have been a statement, a monument designed to withstand the erasures of time. The Great Pyramid of Giza rises out of the desert like a challenge to everything we think we know. Nearly aligned to true north, its sides angled with astonishing accuracy, it encodes proportions that reflect mathematics still celebrated today. Its size and precision continue to puzzle engineers. How was it built with copper tools and manpower alone? How did its builders align it so closely to the cardinal directions? Was it simply the result of extraordinary effort? Or did its creators inherit knowledge carried across generations from an earlier cycle? Even if built entirely with methods we can explain, the pyramid still embodies a truth. Human beings sought permanence, a structure that could defy the resets they must have known were possible. More than 4,000 years later, it still stands, its original casing stones gone, its secrets partly eroded, but its form intact, a testament to the endurance of stone when wood, metal, and memory all fade. And then there is Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, one of the oldest megalithic sites known, dating back 12,000 years. Long before cities, before agriculture, before writing, people carved and raised enormous pillars decorated with images of animals, abstract shapes, and symbols whose meanings remain elusive. Archaeologists believe it was a ceremonial site, a gathering place for ritual and community. But the true mystery lies in its age. It was built when humanity was supposed to be living only as small bands of foragers. The effort required cooperation, planning, and symbolic thought far beyond survival. Even stranger, the site was deliberately buried, preserved under layers of earth until its discovery in the 1990s. Why would anyone bury such a monumental creation? Was it an attempt to hide it, to protect it, to preserve it for the future? Or was it simply abandoned in a ritual act we cannot understand? Whatever the reason, Göbekli Tepe stands as a defiance of the official timeline, a monument whispering that humanity's story is older and stranger than we admit. These megaliths are not isolated curiosities. They appear across the globe. The Moai statues of Easter Island gazing silently over the sea, the giant trilithons of Baalbek in Lebanon weighing hundreds of tons, the Nabta Playa stone circle in the Sahara marking the solstices thousands of years before Stonehenge. Each one raises the same questions. How were they built? Why were they built? And what knowledge did their builders carry? To treat them as primitive shrines is to underestimate the people who raised them. To view them as anomalies is to miss the pattern. Together they suggest that fragments of advanced knowledge, astronomy, geometry, engineering, surfaced again and again in human history, sometimes flourishing briefly before collapsing into silence. If resets occurred, megaliths may have been humanity's way of fighting back against forgetting. Stone endures longer than wood or metal, longer than writing on fragile surfaces. Perhaps these monuments were not just temples or calendars, but time capsules. Perhaps their builders, conscious of living in a fragile age, sought to carve memory into the only medium strong enough to survive the cycle of erasure. If so, then these stones are not merely archaeological sites, but messages from one cycle to the next, instructions whispered across millennia. Their symbols may be misunderstood, their meanings obscure, but the very act of carving them says everything. Remember us. Remember what we knew. What strikes us most about megaliths is their endurance. Civilizations rise and fall, yet these stones remain. Cities crumble into dust, languages vanish, empires dissolve, but the moai still stand. The pyramids still loom, the stones of Stonehenge still align with the sun. They remind us that even when resets erase nearly everything, fragments survive. And in those fragments, the possibility of continuity lives on. Imagine if our world ended tomorrow. Skyscrapers would rust, glass would shatter, plastic would disintegrate, books would rot. But our monuments carved from stone, the Statue of Liberty's granite base, Mount Rushmore's carved faces, the massive concrete and stone dams across rivers, would endure far longer. Thousands of years from now, survivors might walk among them and wonder who built them, why, and how. They might see them as temples, as symbols of gods, as mysteries left by an age more advanced than their own. That is what we do when we stand at Puma Punku, Stonehenge, or Göbekli Tepe. We are the inheritors of fragments, guessing at the lives of people whose knowledge has been largely erased. To view megaliths through the lens of resets is to understand that our ancestors may not have been anomalies of brilliance appearing out of nowhere. They may have been the survivors of earlier cycles, carrying memory in stone, trying desperately to speak across ages. The fact that we still stand before their works is proof that they succeeded, at least in part. Their voices echo in granite and limestone, in basalt and sandstone, telling us that history is deeper than we imagine, that civilization has walked this path before. And perhaps that is why these structures draw us so powerfully. They are not just ancient ruins, they are mirrors, reflecting our own desire to endure, to be remembered, to resist the erasing hand of time. When we look at them, we are not only seeing what was built, we are seeing what was feared, the certainty that one day everything else would vanish, and only stone would remain to carry the story forward. If stone monuments are the voices of past ages carved into the earth, then myths are their echoes carried through breath and memory. They are stories told at firelight, passed from elders to children, shaped by countless retellings until they harden into legend. To modern ears, they sound like imagination, yet their persistence across cultures suggests something more: a shared memory of catastrophe, survival, and renewal. When myths from opposite corners of the world speak of floods, fire from the sky, or darkness that swallows the sun, we must ask, are these coincidences, or are they fragments of history wrapped in story? Flood myths are the most widespread. Nearly every culture tells one. In Mesopotamia, the tale of Utnapishtim, preserved in the Epic of Gilgamesh, describes gods who decide to drown the world, sparing only a chosen man who builds a boat large enough to save his family and animals. The biblical story of Noah echoes this structure, differing in detail but not in essence. In India, the ancient texts tell of Manu, warned by a divine fish to build a vessel before the waters rise. In Greece, Deucalion and Pyrrha survive when Zeus sends a flood, repopulating the world by casting stones over their shoulders. In Central America, the Maya described earlier ages destroyed by water before the present one began. Polynesian traditions recall floods that reshaped their islands, while Native American stories describe deluges that covered the land. Even in far-flung Pacific islands, tales speak of rising seas that swallowed homes. It is hard to believe that so many cultures all imagined the same story independently. Far more likely is that they remembered, each in their own way, a real catastrophe that reshaped the world. Geology provides the context. At the end of the last ice age, glaciers melted rapidly, causing seas to rise more than 100 meters. For people living on coastal plains, where fertile soil and abundant food made life possible, the rising waters must have felt like the end of everything. Entire homelands disappeared within a few generations. From their perspective, the world was drowning. Survivors fled inland, carrying stories of what they had seen. Over time, those stories became myths, retold so they would not be forgotten. Today, we treat them as parables, but they may be oral histories of the greatest flood humanity ever faced. Fire myths are nearly as common. In some Native American traditions, the world ends by fire, only to be reborn again. The Norse speak of Ragnarok, where flames consume the world before it is renewed as green and fertile. Hindu cosmology describes cycles in which worlds end in destruction, sometimes by water, sometimes by fire, before the beginning of another age. In Mesoamerica, Aztec tradition speaks of earlier suns, worlds destroyed by catastrophes, one of them by fire. These stories may preserve memories of volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, or widespread wildfires. The eruption of Mount Toba 74,000 years ago would have blanketed the sky with ash, reduced global temperatures, and set vast regions aflame. For survivors, the sun itself would have seemed to vanish, replaced by smoke and fire. That memory, retold over millennia, could easily become myth. Darkness myths complete the cycle. Across traditions, we find tales of days when the sun disappeared. In Egyptian mythology, Ra battles the serpent Apophis each night, with the fear that one day the sun might never rise again. The Maya described long nights when the sky went black. In some Native American stories, the sun is stolen, plunging the world into darkness until it is restored. In Norse tradition, wolves devour the sun and moon, bringing about the end of days. These may echo real events: volcanic winters when ash blocked the sky, or comet impacts that filled the atmosphere with dust. For those alive in such times, it would have seemed as though the sun had truly died. What makes these myths powerful is their pattern. They describe not just destruction, but renewal. After flood, fire, or darkness, life begins again. Survivors repopulate the land. The world is cleansed, and a new age dawns. This structure mirrors what we see in geology: mass extinctions followed by explosions of life, ice ages ending with fertile new landscapes, destruction paving the way for rebirth. The myths and the rocks speak the same language, one in story, the other in stone. Even more intriguing are the myths that explicitly describe cycles of worlds. The Aztecs believed they lived in the fifth sun after 4 earlier worlds had ended in cataclysm. Hindu cosmology divides time into yugas, vast cycles in which humanity rises and falls, each ending in chaos before renewal. Norse mythology describes not just Ragnarok, but the rebirth of the world afterward, green and fertile. These traditions suggest that ancient peoples did not see history as a straight line, but as a repeating pattern. They expected resets, remembered them, and encoded them into their stories so future generations would be prepared. To dismiss these myths as superstition is to underestimate the resilience of memory. Oral tradition can preserve truth long after physical evidence is gone. Archaeology gives us stones, bones, and artifacts. Myth gives us the human experience of those events. The fear, the survival, the attempt to make sense of what happened. Together they form a fuller picture. Without myth, we might not suspect that floods reshaped human history. Without geology, we might not confirm that floods truly happened. But when myth and science align, the possibility of resets becomes harder to ignore. Imagine sitting beside a fire thousands of years ago, listening to an elder tell of the great flood that swallowed the world. The story is not meant as metaphor. It is memory, carried across generations. The children listening do not need written words. They carry the tale in their minds, retelling it to their own children. In this way, memory outlives writing, outlives stone, sometimes outlives the very cultures that birthed it. That is why the same stories appear in so many places. They are the echoes of survivors, amplified by time, scattered across continents. In our own age, we are surrounded by writing, digital records, libraries, archives. We believe memory is secure. But even now, we know how fragile it is. The burning of the Library of Alexandria erased countless texts. Wars destroy archives. Digital files vanish when servers fail. Imagine a reset today. How many of our stories would survive in 200 generations? Perhaps only the ones told and retold, compressed into parable, simplified into myth. To future people, skyscrapers might become tales of mountains of glass, airplanes, stories of birds of fire. What we call technology might be remembered as magic. And those myths, retold across millennia, might one day sound as strange to their descendants as the story of Atlantis sounds to us. When we look at myths through this lens, they become not fantasies, but archives, each one a coded record of catastrophe, preserved not in stone or writing, but in human voices. They tell us that the earth has reset before, that humanity has endured, and that survival depends on remembering. They may be the faint voices of ancestors, warning us of what has happened and what may happen again. To ignore them is to ignore our own memory. To listen is to realize that we are part of a story far older and far more fragile than we thought. If myths are the memory of resets carried in story, then archaeology gives us the scattered fragments of their material remains. Yet what is striking when we look closely at the record is how uneven it is. There are long stretches of silence, broken suddenly by bursts of activity. Cultures appear seemingly out of nowhere, fully formed with architecture, writing, and art, only to vanish without warning. The rhythm is strange if we assume history is a single continuous climb. But if resets have punctuated the human journey, the rhythm begins to make sense. Destruction followed by renewal. Collapse followed by sudden leaps. Consider again the Maya. Their civilization rose across Central America with astonishing speed, creating vast cities of stone, pyramids aligned with celestial events, and a calendar system so advanced it tracked time with near-perfect accuracy. Yet, after centuries of brilliance, their great cities were abandoned. The jungle reclaimed their monuments, leaving behind only ruins. Scholars argue over causes: climate change, war, disease, but the collapse was rapid, leaving behind more questions than answers. What makes the Maya significant in this discussion is not only their disappearance, but the eerie resemblance their story bears to cycles told in myths. A flourishing age undone in a short span, followed by silence. The Indus Valley civilization tells a similar tale. It emerged around 5,000 years ago, with cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. These were not primitive settlements, but carefully planned urban centers with straight streets, drainage systems, and evidence of centralized authority. Their people left behind seals inscribed with symbols that remain undeciphered, a language frozen in silence. And then, like the Maya, the civilization unraveled. The reasons remain elusive. Some suggest rivers shifted, leaving cities without water. Others point to invasion or disease. Whatever the cause, the result was the same: silence, a great culture fading until only its ruins remained. Even the mighty Roman Empire, so dominant for centuries, eventually succumbed. Rome's roads, aqueducts, and armies once bound an enormous region into a single system. Yet economic strain, internal conflict, and invasions shattered it. To later generations, the ruins of Rome must have seemed almost mythical, relics of giants. What had seemed eternal proved temporary, reminding us that collapse is never far away, even for the most powerful societies. But when we step further back into prehistory, the silences grow more profound. For more than 150,000 years after anatomically modern humans first appeared, the archaeological record is sparse. Stone tools remain nearly unchanged for tens of thousands of years. Then, around 40,000 years ago, the record explodes with creativity. Cave paintings, figurines, musical instruments, advanced hunting tools. This period is sometimes called the creative explosion. But why did it happen then? Why not earlier, when humans had the same bodies and brains? The silence before it suggests not that nothing happened, but that something was lost. If a reset occurred, wiping away earlier cultures, survivors would have returned to simpler ways of life, using stone flakes and basic shelters. Only later, when stability returned, would they rediscover and rebuild. What we see as a sudden leap may be the echo of recovery after catastrophe. This interpretation gains strength when we consider agriculture. Around 10,000 years ago, farming appears almost simultaneously in several parts of the world: the Fertile Crescent, China, Mesoamerica, the Andes, and sub-Saharan Africa. It did not spread gradually from one source, but appeared independently, as though fragments of memory resurfaced across continents. The same is true of monumental architecture. Within a few thousand years of farming, great cities and states emerged in Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and China, each with writing, astronomy, and laws. These appear suddenly in the record, not as slow accumulations but as abrupt flowerings. To see them as inventions is possible. To see them as reinventions, recoveries after silence, fits the pattern of resets. Archaeologists often speak of anomalies, discoveries that do not fit neatly into the accepted timeline. A tool that seems too advanced for its layer, a structure older than agriculture, a map showing knowledge no one should have. Each anomaly can be dismissed individually. Together they suggest gaps, fragments of forgotten ages that survived catastrophe. Silence, in this light, is not proof of nothingness, but evidence of erasure. The earth is a relentless destroyer. Wood decays in centuries, metals corrode in millennia, stone erodes in tens of thousands of years. Unless preserved under extraordinary conditions, the works of humanity vanish quickly. Over hundreds of thousands of years, nearly everything is lost. What survives are fragments, enigmatic ruins, puzzling artifacts, stories encoded as myth. Even the Neanderthals remind us of the fragility of survival. For hundreds of thousands of years, they lived across Europe and Asia, making tools, creating art, and surviving harsh climates. Then, almost overnight, in evolutionary terms, they vanished. Whether through competition with Homo sapiens, disease, or environmental collapse, their disappearance shows how entire branches of humanity can be erased. If resets have swept the Earth many times, then the loss of Neanderthals may have been one more chapter in the larger rhythm of destruction and renewal. When we turn from archaeology to geology, the case grows even stronger. The Earth's layers are filled with evidence of disruption: ash from supervolcanoes, iridium from asteroid impacts, sudden shifts in climate recorded in ice cores. Each of these marks is a scar, a reset etched into stone. If life itself has been nearly erased multiple times, why not civilization? The silence in the human record may not be absence, but aftermath. Survivors of resets may have lived simply, leaving little trace until they rebuilt. By the time they created structures durable enough to endure, the earlier cycles were already gone, reduced to myth and anomaly. It is unsettling to think that most of humanity's story may be hidden beneath this silence. The idea challenges the comforting narrative of steady progress, but it also reveals something extraordinary: resilience. Each silence is followed by renewal. Each collapse gives way to survival. We are not here because the world has been stable. We are here because people endured resets before us, carrying fragments forward, rebuilding when everything seemed lost. The silence in the record is not emptiness. It is testimony. It tells us that even when nearly erased, humanity finds a way to rise again. And so we must ask, what if we are not the beginning but the continuation of countless forgotten ages? What if the silences in our past hide civilizations as complex as our own, swept away by fire, flood, or ice? What if the myths we tell are not inventions but memories, and the ruins we find are not anomalies but remnants? To live with these questions is to live with humility, to recognize that our age, too, is fragile, that silence waits for us as it did for them. And yet, in that fragility lies strength. For if resets are real, then we are proof that survival is possible, that resilience endures, and that the story of humanity, though often erased, is never truly lost. To understand the possibility of resets, we must look not only at human traces, but at the Earth itself, for the planet holds the deepest memory of catastrophe. Its rocks, sediments, and ice cores form a silent archive, each layer recording an age of upheaval. When we read this archive, we find not a smooth progression, but sharp interruptions, sudden events that reshaped everything. These are the marks of resets, not imagined, but written into the bones of the world. Take the Younger Dryas, that strange 1,000-year freeze beginning about 12,800 years ago. The planet had been warming, glaciers retreating, seas rising, and then suddenly, almost overnight in geological terms, the climate plunged back into near ice age conditions. Ice cores show the abrupt drop in temperature. Charcoal deposits across continents hint at massive fires. Some scientists believe a comet or asteroid exploded in the atmosphere, igniting wildfires and sending shockwaves across the globe. Whether caused by impact or by shifts in ocean currents, the event was devastating. For any human societies alive then, it would have been as though the world itself had betrayed them. Crops failing, animals dying, winters unending. If advanced cultures had existed, they would have struggled to endure. To us, the archaeological silence that follows may look like nothing. In truth, it may be the shadow of collapse. Go back further still to 74,000 years ago, when the Toba supervolcano erupted in what is now Indonesia. It was one of the most powerful eruptions in human history, spewing ash that spread across continents. The sky darkened, temperatures dropped, and genetic studies suggest humanity passed through a bottleneck, reduced to only a few thousand survivors worldwide. Imagine what this meant. Communities shattered, entire regions wiped clean, survivors clinging to existence in scattered pockets. If they carried knowledge, most of it would have vanished with their collapse. Yet something endured, for from those few thousand we descend. That survival alone is extraordinary, but it also suggests how fragile civilizations could be. If resets can reduce humanity to embers once, they can do so again. Further back still, 65 million years ago, the Chicxulub asteroid struck what is now Mexico. Its impact released energy greater than billions of atomic bombs, hurling debris into the atmosphere, blocking sunlight, and triggering a collapse of ecosystems. The dinosaurs, rulers of the Earth for more than 100 million years, vanished in the aftermath. Yet their extinction opened the way for mammals to rise, and eventually for us to appear. This was a reset not just of life's direction, but of the entire story of evolution. Without it, there would be no humans, no civilizations, no myths of fire and flood. The lesson is clear. Catastrophe reshapes destiny. Other layers of rock tell of mass extinctions caused by volcanic eruptions that lasted not days, but millennia. Flood basalts in Siberia and India poured out lava across vast regions, releasing gases that poisoned air and water. Climate shifted. Species vanished. Each time, the world became nearly unrecognizable. And each time, life eventually returned, but never in the same form. Evolution itself is guided by resets, destruction giving birth to new beginnings. If this is true of life as a whole, why should humanity be an exception? What makes resets especially powerful is how quickly they erase evidence. Consider the geological forces at work: earthquakes lifting coastlines, tsunamis sweeping across oceans, glaciers grinding mountains to rubble, volcanoes burying landscapes under ash. A thriving city in the path of such forces would leave little behind. In a few thousand years, nearly all traces would vanish, and in 10,000, nothing recognizable would remain. The Earth is not a museum. It does not preserve everything. It is a restless surface, constantly recycling itself. Mountains rise and fall, rivers change course, forests spread and retreat. Against this backdrop, civilizations are fragile, fleeting experiments vulnerable to the planet's moods. Even today, we see glimpses of this fragility. In 1883, the eruption of Krakatoa in Indonesia was so violent that it destroyed most of the island, sent tsunamis across the seas, and dimmed the sky around the world. The explosion was heard thousands of miles away. In 1815, Mount Tambora erupted, leading to the year without a summer. Crops failed, famine spread, and societies trembled. These were local resets, small compared to Toba or Chicxulub, yet still devastating. Now imagine such events magnified, striking at scales that reshape entire continents. That is what the geological record shows us again and again. When we overlay this record with myth, the parallels are startling. Floods remembered in story align with rising seas at the end of the Ice Age. Fire myths echo volcanic eruptions and impacts. Tales of darkness recall volcanic winters and comet explosions. Ancient people may not have understood the causes, but they remembered the effects, passing them down through story. And in those stories we hear the faint human experience of resets, fear, survival, renewal. The challenge for us is that geology is impersonal, while myth is intimate. Rocks tell us there was ash, but not what it felt like to breathe in darkness. Ice cores reveal sudden cooling, but not what it meant to wake up to endless winter. Fossils show extinctions, but not the grief of survivors. To combine them is to glimpse the full picture. The Earth's resets not only as natural events, but as lived human catastrophes, reshaping lives, erasing cultures, scattering survivors. This perspective forces us to reconsider the silences in our past. Perhaps we do not lack evidence because nothing existed, but because resets erased most of it. Wooden structures decay in centuries, metals corrode in millennia, writing on fragile surfaces disappears quickly. Unless preserved by chance, buried in ash, frozen in ice, or sealed in stone, most of what humans create is temporary. Over tens of thousands of years, the probability of survival is slim. That is why so many stretches of history feel empty. They are not empty. They are erased. To look at the Earth's layers is to confront how often this erasure happens. And yet, each time, life returns. Each time, humanity adapts. The fact that we stand here now, telling stories and carving meaning from stone, is proof of resilience. But it is also a warning. If resets are part of the rhythm of the planet, then we, too, live within that rhythm. Our cities, our technologies, our global networks are not outside it. They are as vulnerable as any temple drowned, any city buried, any myth remembered only in fragments. What humbles us most is the realization that the Earth does not distinguish between stone tools and satellites, between wooden huts and skyscrapers. To the glaciers, the volcanoes, the asteroids, all are fragile, all are temporary. Our age may feel unique, but in the scale of deep time, it is just another chapter, one that could be erased as easily as the others. If we are the inheritors of forgotten ages, then we are also participants in a cycle far larger than ourselves. The rocks beneath our feet tell us this clearly. Resets are not the exception, they are the rule. If the Earth's layers are written in stone, then artifacts are whispers that slip through the cracks, small, puzzling fragments that resist easy explanation. Most of the time, archaeology proceeds with steady confidence. Pottery shards, stone tools, burial sites, all fitting neatly into the expected story of human progress. But every so often, something surfaces that doesn't belong. An object too advanced, too strange, or simply too old. These anomalies are often dismissed, explained away as mistakes or coincidences. Yet when viewed through the lens of resets, they take on a new significance. They may not be outliers at all, but survivors, pieces of forgotten ages that endured when everything else was erased. The Antikythera mechanism is one of the clearest examples. Recovered from a shipwreck off the coast of Greece in 1901, it looked at first like a lump of corroded bronze. But closer study revealed something astonishing. A complex arrangement of gears capable of predicting eclipses, tracking planetary movements, and calculating astronomical cycles. Built more than 2,000 years ago, it has been called the world's first computer. Its precision is staggering, with teeth on gears cut so finely that similar technology would not appear again for over a millennium. Where did this knowledge come from? If Greek artisans could create such a device, why are there no others like it? Was it a unique miracle of ingenuity, or the faint echo of knowledge preserved from earlier cycles, carried forward into an age that barely understood what it had inherited? Other anomalies lie even deeper in time. In South Africa, strange metal spheres have been found in rock layers dated billions of years old. Some scientists argue they are natural formations, products of geological processes, yet their symmetry, grooves, and shapes seem uncannily deliberate. If they are natural, they remind us of how easily we can mistake the unusual for the artificial. But if even one is not natural, it hints at something astonishing. The possibility that artifacts from an unimaginable past cycle lie buried in the earth, waiting to be recognized. There are also stories of tools, nails, or manufactured objects found in layers of earth far older than they should be. Many of these claims are controversial, often dismissed as hoaxes or errors in dating, and yet the sheer number of such reports keeps the question alive. If resets truly occurred, then the record of earlier ages would not appear as intact cities or complete machines. It would appear exactly like this: scattered, puzzling fragments that refuse to fit into the accepted timeline. Even art carries anomalies. In ancient temples of India, carvings depict shapes that resemble rockets or flying craft. In Mesoamerican art, figures sometimes appear that look like astronauts or people in elaborate suits. Skeptics call these interpretations fanciful, but the symbolism is striking. Could these be distorted memories of technologies from earlier cycles, reshaped into myth and symbol? What looks to us like imagination may have been a reflection of something real, remembered imperfectly through resets. The difficulty, of course, lies in interpretation. Science demands caution, and rightly so. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, but resets change what kind of evidence we should expect. If civilizations were erased tens or hundreds of thousands of years ago, nearly everything would be gone. Organic material decays in centuries, metals corrode in millennia, even stone crumbles in tens of thousands of years. What survives are the rare, the buried, the accidental. That means fragments are not anomalies. They are exactly what we should expect. To demand complete cities or intact machines is to misunderstand the destructive power of time. Writing itself is a fragile witness. The earliest known systems, cuneiform in Mesopotamia, hieroglyphs in Egypt, are only about 5,000 years old. That is less than 3% of the time modern humans have existed. Everything before that is silent, unless preserved by myth or artifact. And even writing that once existed is not immune to erasure. The Library of Alexandria, often imagined as the greatest collection of knowledge in the ancient world, was destroyed over centuries, taking countless texts with it. Fires, wars, and neglect can erase libraries as easily as floods erase coastlines. If resets occurred, they may have destroyed not only cities, but archives of knowledge, leaving survivors to start again with little more than memory. Consider how selective survival is. We know of Mesopotamia because clay tablets endured. We know of Egypt because hieroglyphs were carved into stone. But what of cultures that wrote on wood, bark, or cloth? Their records would vanish within centuries, leaving no trace. If civilizations existed before the last ice age, their writings, if they had them, would almost certainly be gone, washed away by floods, buried under ice, or eroded to nothing. Their stories would be lost unless preserved in stone or myth. That is why fragments matter. They may be the only clues that something more once existed. Think of the Antikythera mechanism again. If it had not sunk with that ship, if it had not been preserved underwater, we might never have known it existed. How many other such devices were built, used, and lost without preservation? How many were melted down for their metal, their knowledge vanishing along with their form? For every artifact we find, there may be countless others erased. That is the nature of resets. They do not leave abundant evidence. They leave riddles. Our own world is filled with technology, yet if abandoned today, most of it would vanish quickly. Skyscrapers would crumble, plastics would fragment, metals would corrode. In 10,000 years, little would remain. In 100,000, almost nothing. If another civilization rose long after us, they might find only fragments, a shard of glass, a piece of alloy, perhaps a carving on stone. They would puzzle over these just as we puzzle over the Antikythera mechanism or the spheres of South Africa. They might dismiss them as anomalies, but to those who survived, they would be memories of a lost world. To recognize this is to see anomalies not as curiosities, but as keys. Each one may be a window into an earlier cycle, a reminder that what we call history may not be the full story. Mainstream science is cautious, often skeptical, and that skepticism is valuable. It protects us from error. But it also risks blinding us to possibilities. If we insist that anomalies must always be mistakes, we close the door to the deeper story they may be trying to tell. And so we are left with fragments, enigmatic, puzzling, but persistent. They resist explanation. They defy the neat arc of progress. They whisper of ages erased. Whether it is a gear hidden in bronze, a carving of a strange figure, or a sphere that should not exist, each anomaly is a reminder that the Earth may have been reset many times, and that we, too, are building a world whose traces may one day be nothing more than fragments, waiting for another age to wonder what we were and how we vanished. Written history feels vast when we study it, stretching back thousands of years to the earliest kings of Sumer, the pharaohs of Egypt, the emperors of China. Yet compared to the full span of human existence, it is barely a flicker. Modern humans have walked the earth for at least 200,000 years, but the oldest writing is only about 5,000 years old. That means more than 97% of our time has no written record at all. It is an unsettling thought. Everything we know from books, inscriptions, and records is only the surface layer of a much deeper story. Beneath it lies silence, and perhaps entire civilizations erased by resets. The absence of writing does not mean the absence of culture. People passed down stories long before they carved symbols into clay or inked words onto papyrus. Oral tradition was the original archive. Around fires and in gathering places, elders told myths and histories, encoding memory into narrative. This method is fragile. Details shift, names change, meanings blur, but it can preserve truth for astonishing spans of time. Flood myths are examples of this resilience, echoing events that may have occurred thousands of years before they were recorded. Without writing, memory survives in story, in ritual, in symbol carved into stone. The fact that so many ancient myths align with geological events suggests that oral tradition was strong enough to carry memory across resets. But the fragility of writing itself reminds us how much can be lost. The Library of Alexandria is the most famous symbol of this loss, imagined as a treasure of ancient knowledge destroyed by fire and neglect. Countless scrolls disappeared, their contents never to be recovered. We cannot know what was lost: maps, histories, scientific ideas, philosophies, all gone. And if this could happen in just a few centuries, how much more would vanish over tens of thousands of years, swept away by floods, earthquakes, or volcanic eruptions? Writing feels permanent to us, but it is not. Paper burns, ink fades, tablets crumble. Even inscriptions carved into stone erode eventually, ground away by wind and rain. What survives is selective. Mesopotamia is remembered because its people wrote on durable clay tablets. Egypt endures in memory because its hieroglyphs were carved into stone. But what of cultures that used wood, bark, or cloth as their medium? Their records would have vanished within centuries, leaving no trace. If entire civilizations existed before the last ice age, their writings, if they had them, would almost certainly be gone. Unless buried under extraordinary conditions, sealed in caves, frozen in ice, they would not survive long enough for us to find them. That is why our sense of history is so compressed. We assume nothing significant happened before writing, when in truth it may be that everything was simply erased. Consider how fragile our own records are. The vast majority of modern information is digital, stored on hard drives, servers, and cloud systems. Yet without constant maintenance, these archives decay. Magnetic drives fail, disks corrode, data becomes unreadable. If society collapsed today, how long would our digital memory survive? Within decades, most of it would be inaccessible. Within centuries, almost all of it would be gone. In 10,000 years, the evidence of our information age would be nearly invisible. Perhaps a few stone monuments would remain, a scattering of artifacts, but the billions of words and images that define us would vanish. Future civilizations might find fragments and wonder at who we were. To them, we might seem like a myth, just as we now treat Atlantis. This perspective shifts how we see history. What we call the beginning of civilization may only be the beginning of writing. It is not necessarily the first time humans organized into complex societies, built monuments, or created technology. It may simply be the most recent attempt, the one that coincided with the survival of durable records. Earlier cycles may have existed, but their traces were erased before they could leave anything behind. In this light, writing is less a marker of the true beginning and more a restart point, the moment when people once again began carving memory into something that could survive longer than voices. And even then, survival is precarious. Clay tablets endured in Mesopotamia because they were baked, accidentally or deliberately. Egyptian hieroglyphs endured because they were cut into stone. The Mayans, who wrote on bark paper, left far fewer records, most destroyed by time and by the flames of conquest. What survives shapes what we believe. We think Mesopotamia was first because we have its tablets. We think Egypt was eternal because we can still read its temples. But what of cultures that left no stone, only wood? What of those whose monuments were drowned by seas or crushed by glaciers? They may have been as complex as any we know, yet they are absent simply because their memory medium was fragile. The silence that stretches across most of human existence is therefore not proof of emptiness, but a sign of vulnerability. Time is a merciless editor. Unless knowledge is written on stone or encoded into myth strong enough to endure retelling, it disappears. And if resets swept across the earth as often as geology suggests, then the erasure would have been total in many places. Fires, floods, ice, and earthquakes would have obliterated archives as easily as they obliterated homes. Survivors would have carried only what they could remember, reshaping it into stories to tell their children. Those stories are what reach us as myth. When we reflect on this, our own permanence feels less certain. We imagine that books, archives, and digital libraries will preserve us forever, but history warns otherwise. Even our most ambitious attempts at durability may fail. In 1,000 years, how many of our libraries will survive? In 10,000, how many of our monuments will remain? In 100,000, will anyone know we existed? It is humbling to realize that the answer may be the same as it is for forgotten ages. Only fragments, only myths, only the faintest echoes in stone. And yet there is a strange comfort in this recognition, for it means we are not alone in fragility. Every civilization before us, remembered or forgotten, faced the same uncertainty. They, too, carved their stories into whatever medium they thought would last. Some chose stone, and their voices reach us still. Others chose memory, and their voices reach us as myth. In either case, they endured across resets, not completely, but enough to whisper that they were here. We, too, are carving our stories, whether into stone, paper, or digital code. Perhaps most of it will be lost. But perhaps, as with Göbekli Tepe or the pyramids, a fragment will survive, carrying our voice into cycles yet to come. What written history conceals by its brevity, myth and archaeology reveal in fragments. They remind us that the true story of humanity may be far older, far stranger, and far more cyclical than we admit. We are not looking at a single line of progress, but at the latest chapter of a book rewritten many times. Each reset erases much, but not everything. And in the fragments that remain, stones, myths, anomalies, we find the possibility of continuity, the faint thread that binds us to forgotten ages. When we think of technology, we usually imagine it as the crown jewel of our age, something unique to the modern world. Computers, satellites, skyscrapers, and machines feel like the final step of a long, steady climb that began with stone tools. But if resets are real, then the possibility emerges that we are not the first to climb this ladder. Perhaps we are only the latest. And if others came before, their traces would be almost impossible to see today, erased by the passage of time, buried beneath oceans, or ground to dust by glaciers. It is difficult to grasp how quickly technology disappears when abandoned. Picture a modern city left empty. Within a decade, weeds push through concrete, windows shatter, roofs collapse. Within a century, forests reclaim the streets, steel corrodes, bridges fall. Within 1,000 years, only mounds and rubble remain. And after 10,000, even those are gone. Skyscrapers would crumble into indistinguishable stone and metal fragments. Machines would rust into nothing. Plastics would fracture into dust. Over hundreds of thousands of years, tectonic shifts would bury everything deeper still. Unless preserved by chance in rare conditions, the traces of an advanced civilization would vanish almost entirely. This idea has been explored by scientists in what is called the Silurian hypothesis, named after a fictional species from science fiction. The question it asks is simple. If an industrial civilization had existed millions of years ago, would we be able to detect it today? The sobering answer is that almost nothing would survive in obvious form. What we might find instead are indirect clues, unusual chemical signatures in sediments, odd concentrations of carbon, or sudden shifts in the fossil record. In other words, the fingerprints of technology might exist, but they would be subtle, easily overlooked, or mistaken for natural phenomena. Consider our own age. Future civilizations, millions of years from now, might not find our cities intact, but they might detect thin layers of plastics turned to microfragments, chemical residues from pesticides and industry, or spikes of carbon dioxide trapped in ice and sediment. They might see a sudden mass extinction of species, a marker of environmental disruption. They might even discover radioactive isotopes from nuclear activity, long-lived enough to linger in trace amounts. To them, these would be hints, puzzling signs of a civilization that once lived, signs not obvious but undeniable. If such subtle traces could mark us, then perhaps the Earth already holds similar signatures from ages before ours, waiting to be recognized. Stories of ancient technology appear in myths as well. In India, ancient texts like the Mahabharata describe flying machines called vimanas and weapons of immense power. In Mesoamerica, carvings depict figures some interpret as astronauts or machinery. Skeptics argue these are symbolic or misinterpreted. But if myths are memories carried through resets, perhaps these are distorted recollections of technologies that once existed. A survivor trying to describe an aircraft without the language for engines or wings might compare it to a bird of fire. A story retold for generations could become legend, losing detail but preserving essence. What we dismiss as fantasy might be memory refracted through time. Even more tantalizing are the so-called out-of-place artifacts, objects found where they should not be. Reports exist of nails, tools, or even what look like manufactured items discovered in layers of rock dated to tens or hundreds of thousands of years ago. Many of these are controversial, often explained as natural formations or errors. And yet the possibility lingers. If resets wiped the Earth clean, then only the rarest of fragments would remain, buried deep, surfacing by accident. We should not expect complete machines or cities, only hints, anomalies that defy neat classification. The Antikythera mechanism, though far younger, reminds us of this. It was preserved only because it sank in a shipwreck and lay hidden underwater for 2,000 years. Had it not been discovered, we might never have guessed that the Greeks were capable of such advanced astronomy. And if such a device could vanish from history for centuries, how many others may have existed in earlier ages, erased before we could ever know them? Imagine a cycle long before ours, a civilization reaching heights we cannot imagine. They may have mapped the world, harnessed energy, built structures now long gone. When catastrophe struck, an asteroid, a supervolcano, a sudden ice age, their cities crumbled, their knowledge scattered. Survivors retreated to simpler ways, carrying fragments of memory. Over generations, those fragments became myths. Over millennia, their artifacts dissolved into dust, and tens of thousands of years later, we rise, believing ourselves the first. It is humbling to realize how fragile even our most enduring achievements are. We think of technology as permanent, yet in the scale of deep time, it is fleeting. The Earth does not preserve easily. It erases, it recycles, it buries. If resets occurred, then countless cycles may have risen and fallen without leaving obvious traces. We may only catch glimpses, faint signatures in stone, myth, or anomaly. And perhaps that is why the idea unsettles us. We like to imagine ourselves as unique, as the pinnacle of progress. To accept that others may have come before is to accept that we too could vanish, leaving little behind. It is to accept that permanence is an illusion, that our skyscrapers and satellites are as fragile as the stone tools of forgotten ages. It forces us to see ourselves not as the final act, but as one more chapter in a long, repeating story. Yet in that realization lies wonder. If we are part of a cycle, then we are connected not only to our known ancestors but to forgotten ones as well. Their voices may survive only in myths, their presence only in anomalies, but they are part of us. We are their continuation, their resilience carried forward. And just as they endured resets and began again, so too might we. The Earth may erase, but humanity persists. That is the deeper story hidden in the silence, not just loss, but survival. To imagine that we are not the first technological age is not to indulge in fantasy. It is to acknowledge how little we know of the deep past, and how fragile even our own age truly is. The rocks beneath our feet, the myths in our stories, the anomalies in our archaeology, all hint at cycles repeating, knowledge lost and found again, civilizations erased and reborn. If resets are real, then technology is not a straight climb, but a spiral, rising, collapsing, and rising again. And we, standing amid our machines and satellites, may simply be the latest turn of that spiral, fragile and brilliant, temporary, yet enduring in ways we do not yet understand. Silence is often mistaken for emptiness. When archaeologists uncover long stretches of time with little evidence, they tend to assume nothing happened, that people lived simple lives without change. But silence is not proof of absence. It may be the trace of erasure. If resets occurred, silence is exactly what we would expect to find. A gap where catastrophe swept away what came before, leaving only the faintest clues behind. What looks like stillness may, in fact, be the shadow of disaster. The archaeological record is filled with such silences. For tens of thousands of years, stone tools remain simple and unchanged. Then suddenly cave art appears, sculptures are carved, music is made. Why the sudden leap? It is easy to imagine that humans simply invented culture at that moment. Yet if earlier attempts had been erased, what we see may not be invention, but reinvention, the rediscovery of memory after a long silence. The same pattern emerges with farming, cities, and writing, long stretches of nothing, then abrupt bursts of progress. Viewed through resets, these are not mysteries, but rhythms. Collapse, silence, renewal. Even the endings of cultures often arrive with silence. The Indus Valley civilization thrived for centuries with carefully planned cities and organized trade. Then it vanished. The reasons remain unclear. Perhaps drought, perhaps shifting rivers, perhaps disease. But the effect was silence. A culture gone, its language undeciphered, its memory broken. The Maya, too, left their great cities to the jungle. To outsiders, centuries later, it seemed as if they had simply disappeared. The truth was more complex. People survived, communities endured, but the silence of monuments suggested collapse. These examples are not isolated. They are reminders of how often civilizations fade, not with fanfare, but with quiet. The earth itself contributes to the silence. Organic materials decay quickly. Wood, leather, textiles vanish in centuries unless preserved in rare conditions. Even metals corrode within millennia. Stone lasts longer, but even stone erodes and crumbles over tens of thousands of years. Unless buried under ash or sealed in ice, most human creations vanish surprisingly fast. After hundreds of thousands of years, almost nothing would survive. If civilizations existed in distant cycles, their traces would be nearly invisible, erased by time's relentless hand. What we would find are anomalies. A carving here, a fragment there, puzzling artifacts that do not fit. And that is precisely what we do find. Consider the role of water in this silence. Floods erase landscapes with terrifying efficiency. Rivers shift, washing away settlements. Rising seas drown coastlines, covering entire regions. The ocean is not a gentle preserver, but a destroyer, dissolving wood, corroding metal, eroding stone. Cities swallowed by the sea would leave almost nothing after thousands of years. Even ruins like Pavlopetri and Dwarka, visible today, are fragile. Given more time, they too will dissolve. If earlier coastal civilizations existed, they would be gone, their memory preserved only in myths of drowned worlds. Ice also silences. During glaciations, sheets of ice kilometers thick scraped continents clean, grinding mountains down, carrying boulders for hundreds of miles, burying entire regions under frozen weight. Any city in their path would be obliterated, crushed, and erased. When the ice retreated, meltwater floods reshaped rivers and drowned coastlines. Survivors would flee inland, leaving their cities behind to be erased. Thousands of years later, nothing would remain. The silence in the record may be the legacy of ice as much as of fire or water. Even more subtle is the silence of neglect. Imagine a world after collapse, survivors scattered in small groups. Their priority is not preserving history, but finding food, water, and shelter. Complex knowledge, how to build machines, how to write, how to preserve archives, disappears quickly when not practiced. Within a few generations, most of it is gone. What survives are fragments, stories retold, symbols remembered vaguely, skills adapted into simpler forms. To archaeologists tens of thousands of years later, it looks as though civilization suddenly appeared out of nowhere. In truth, it may have been reborn, carrying only fragments of what came before. We see this even in more recent times. When Rome collapsed, much of its knowledge vanished in Europe. Aqueducts fell into disrepair, cities shrank, literacy declined. Later generations marveled at Roman ruins, unsure how such works had been achieved. To them, it felt like a gap, a silence, between greatness and their own time. And yet Rome's collapse was relatively recent and relatively well documented. Extend that silence across tens of thousands of years, and the effect would be even greater. Entire ages could vanish, leaving only myths and ruins with no context. Some researchers have pointed out that we might not even recognize evidence if we found it. A fragment of advanced alloy in ancient rock might be dismissed as contamination or natural formation. A pattern in soil visible only from the air might go unnoticed. Even ruins could be mistaken for natural landscapes once weather and vegetation reshaped them. Silence does not always mean absence. It may mean we have not looked in the right places, or that what remains is too subtle for us to see. Silence itself can be a kind of signal. It tells us that history may not be continuous, that there are missing pages in the story of humanity. Each silence could represent not emptiness, but aftermath. The pause between cycles, the time when survivors rebuilt slowly from what was left. To interpret silence this way is to reimagine history not as a line, but as a broken rhythm, a melody interrupted by resets, each new verse beginning after the last fell silent. Our own time is not immune to silence. Imagine if catastrophe struck tomorrow, an asteroid, a supervolcano, or even global climate collapse. Our digital records would vanish quickly without maintenance. Our cities would decay. Within a few centuries, survivors might tell stories of a golden age, of towers that touched the sky and machines that flew. Within millennia, little evidence would remain. If another civilization rose long after, they might find fragments and wonder if we ever existed. To them, our age might seem like a myth, a silence in the record with only faint echoes to suggest otherwise. And perhaps that is exactly what we are seeing when we look at the gaps in our own past. Perhaps earlier civilizations rose and fell, leaving silences where their memory should be. Perhaps myths of floods and fires are not inventions, but memories carried across those silences. Perhaps ruins like Göbekli Tepe or Pumapunku are not anomalies, but fragments breaking through the veil. The silence in history is not empty. It is full of possibility. It is the space where forgotten worlds lie buried, erased by time, waiting to be rediscovered. To listen to silence is to recognize how fragile our own permanence is. We are surrounded by the illusion of continuity, but the earth is restless, and resets are inevitable. If we vanish, our silence will join the others, another gap in the long rhythm of destruction and renewal. And one day, perhaps, new voices will rise, puzzled by fragments of our world, wondering who we were and how we disappeared. Silence is not the end of the story. It is the place where one chapter closes and another waits to begin. When ideas like repeated civilizations are raised, mainstream science often reacts with skepticism. Archaeology, anthropology, and geology are cautious fields by design. They rely on evidence that can be measured, tested, and replicated. In that framework, extraordinary claims demand extraordinary proof. Since no intact cities or undeniable machines from ancient ages have been unearthed, the notion of forgotten civilizations is often dismissed as speculation. Yet skepticism itself is not the problem. It protects us from error. The problem is when skepticism hardens into certainty, when silence in the record is treated as proof of absence rather than as an open question. History is full of ideas once ridiculed that later became accepted. Continental drift was mocked as fantasy until plate tectonics confirmed it. The idea that stones fell from the sky was dismissed as myth until meteorites were studied and catalogued. Even the notion of deep time, that the Earth was billions of years old, was once shocking. Science evolves not by clinging to certainty, but by following evidence wherever it leads. If resets are real, the evidence would not appear as neat ruins preserved in perfect condition. It would appear exactly as we find it now, in anomalies, fragments, myths, and silences. To dismiss these entirely because they do not fit the model is to risk repeating the mistakes of the past, when new ideas were ignored simply because they did not align with what was already believed. There are also practical reasons why the idea of resets struggles for acceptance. Funding for archaeological work tends to flow toward sites that support established timelines. Excavations are expensive, and researchers are under pressure to produce results that fit within accepted frameworks. Submerged coastlines, where much of the evidence for earlier civilizations might lie, remain largely unexplored because underwater archaeology requires vast resources. Deep drilling into ancient layers is rare. Most research is concentrated in areas already known to yield results consistent with current history. The silence of the record may therefore reflect not only what has been lost, but also what we have not yet looked for. Cultural reasons play a role as well. The idea of forgotten civilizations unsettles the narrative of progress. We prefer to believe that humanity is climbing steadily upward from simplicity to complexity, that we are the peak of history, not a cycle within it. To accept resets is to accept fragility, to admit that what we build can be erased, that we are not necessarily unique. This challenges our sense of identity and permanence. It is easier to dismiss the idea than to confront its implications. But science has never been about comfort. It is about truth, however unsettling. None of this is to say that every claim of lost civilizations is correct. Many supposed anomalies have been exposed as hoaxes, misinterpretations, or exaggerations. Skepticism is necessary. But between blind belief and blind dismissal lies a middle path: curiosity. To ask the question seriously is not to abandon science, but to honor it. If the Earth has been reset many times, then the traces would be rare, scattered, ambiguous. That is exactly what we see. To treat this as coincidence is one choice. To treat it as possibility is another. We should remember that science advances through questions, not through certainties. The same evidence can be seen differently depending on the lens we use. A myth can be dismissed as imagination, or it can be read as cultural memory. An anomalous artifact can be ignored as error, or it can be investigated as a potential clue. A silence in the record can be explained as nothing, or it can be seen as the aftermath of erasure. Which interpretation we choose shapes the story we tell about ourselves. Even within science, the door is not closed. New technologies are expanding what we can discover. LiDAR scanning has revealed entire hidden cities beneath jungles in Central America and Southeast Asia, showing us that vast civilizations existed where we once saw only forest. Sonar mapping of the ocean floor is beginning to reveal structures that could be natural or man-made, waiting for further study. Ice cores and sediment layers continue to provide records of sudden climate changes, asteroid impacts, and volcanic eruptions. Each discovery adds weight to the possibility that resets shaped not only the Earth, but humanity as well. The caution of science should not discourage us. It should guide us. If resets are real, then proving it will require patience, precision, and openness. We may never find intact cities preserved from earlier cycles, but we may find patterns and myths that align with geology, anomalies in maps that point to forgotten knowledge, chemical signatures in sediments that suggest industrial activity long before us. Each clue may be faint, but together they could form a picture strong enough to shift the model, just as plate tectonics once did. Until then, the idea of resets remains on the margins, neither fully accepted nor entirely dismissed. It is speculation, but speculation grounded in evidence that demands attention. To consider it seriously is not to reject science, but to expand its horizon. After all, the greatest danger in any field is not being wrong, but being unwilling to ask questions. If we assume too quickly that nothing existed before the known timeline, we risk overlooking the faint traces that suggest otherwise. And perhaps that is the deeper lesson of resets: humility. We are not the masters of history, but participants in it, fragile and temporary. Our knowledge, our certainty, our belief in permanence, all of it can be swept away in an instant. The earth does not care for our narratives. It moves in cycles of fire, flood, and ice. If earlier civilizations existed, they too believed in their permanence, and yet they are gone, leaving only whispers. We should not make the same mistake of believing ourselves immune. Skepticism is valuable, but so is imagination. Between them lies the path to discovery. To walk it is to hold two truths at once: that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that absence of evidence is not always evidence of absence. In that space of possibility, resets live. And in that space, the story of humanity becomes far older, far more mysterious, and far more fragile than we once believed. If Earth has truly been reset many times, then we must face an unsettling thought. We ourselves may be standing only on a fragile peak, unaware of how temporary it might be. Our cities feel solid, our technology dazzling, our reach unprecedented. We fly through the sky, speak across continents instantly, and even send machines beyond our planet. It is easy to believe we are different, that we have escaped the cycles that erased those before us. But history warns otherwise. The Maya, the Indus Valley, the Roman Empire all believed in their permanence, and yet all fell. If collapses can happen regionally, why not globally? Our civilization rests on delicate balances: stable climate, fertile soil, predictable seasons, and interconnected systems of energy and trade. These are the pillars upon which our age depends. If any of these falter, the structures we take for granted tremble. And we know how fragile they are. A few degrees of warming can shift rainfall patterns, disrupt harvests, and cause seas to rise. A volcanic eruption can ground flights and darken skies. A single asteroid, rare but inevitable in geological time, could erase decades of progress overnight. We like to think of ourselves as immune, but we are as bound to the rhythms of the earth as any who came before. Consider how dependent we are on interconnection. Food grown in one region feeds millions on the other side of the world. Energy extracted from beneath one nation fuels cities half a globe away. Supply chains stretch across continents, a vast web of ships, trucks, planes, and digital systems. This complexity is our strength, but it is also our weakness. A collapse in one part of the web can ripple outward, unraveling the whole. If a global reset came, not even from a comet or volcano, but from systemic failure, we would discover how fragile our networks truly are. Even war has the potential to trigger a reset. Our weapons are no longer spears and swords, but bombs, capable of reshaping continents. Nuclear arsenals hold enough destructive power to create a winter of ash and fire, dimming the sun as surely as any volcanic eruption. If unleashed, they could scatter survivors into small pockets, returning humanity to simpler ways of life. Future generations might remember us as myths, describing machines of thunder and suns that fell from the sky. The traces of our technology would fade, but the stories would endure, reshaped into legend. Yet resets need not be so dramatic. Even subtle shifts can topple civilizations. Prolonged droughts can starve populations. Floods can displace millions. Pandemics can destabilize societies. Economic collapse can unravel systems faster than war. Each of these alone is survivable, but together they overwhelm resilience. History shows us this pattern again and again. Civilizations fall not only from one single blow, but from many pressures converging at once. If such convergence happened on a global scale, the result would feel like a reset. It is not difficult to imagine how quickly our age could vanish. Imagine rising seas swallowing New York, London, Shanghai, Mumbai. Imagine storms tearing through coasts, droughts parching farmlands, fires sweeping forests. Imagine trade collapsing, economies faltering, nations fracturing under pressure. Survivors would scatter inland, clinging to what they could. In a few generations, stories of skyscrapers might sound like tales of impossible towers, airplanes like firebirds, satellites like stars once controlled by humans. Myths would form, carrying fragments of memory into the future. The question is not only whether we could survive, but what would endure of us. Our technology, so advanced, is fragile. Electronics corrode, machines break, servers fail. Without maintenance, they vanish quickly. In thousands of years, little of our digital age would remain. What might survive are our monuments of stone, mountain carvings, great dams, pyramids of glass and steel if they are buried and preserved. Perhaps even the Voyager spacecraft, drifting far beyond our planet, would one day be discovered by another age. But here on Earth, most of our achievements would fade. We would become fragments, anomalies, puzzles for those who came after. And so myths may already be carrying the voices of forgotten ages, just as future myths might carry ours. Atlantis may be one such memory, Dwarka another, Yonaguni yet another. Even now, our own stories may seed the legends of the future. Imagine survivors after a collapse, retelling tales of a world where humans reached the moon, where they built towers of glass, where they spoke to one another across the air. To their children, these would sound like miracles. To their grandchildren, they would be legends. Thousands of years later, they might be myths, dismissed by future scholars, until an artifact, a fragment, an anomaly proved otherwise. The possibility of resets forces us to reframe how we see ourselves. We are not outside of history, but within it. We are not immune to the forces that shape the earth. Our age, though remarkable, is as fragile as any before it. To see this is not to despair, but to awaken. It is to realize that permanence has never been part of the human story. What has endured is resilience. Each time the earth resets, humanity adapts, rebuilds, and rises again. If we are part of a cycle, then our task is not to escape it, but to endure it, to carry forward memory, to leave fragments that can survive. Perhaps that is the truest legacy we can aim for. Not to believe we will last forever, but to ensure that something of us does. To carve our story into stone, to seed myths with memory, to send messages beyond Earth. If resets come again, as history suggests they will, then what survives of us will not be our machines or our wealth, but our stories, our fragments, our endurance, and in that endurance we join all who came before, participants in a rhythm far older than we can grasp. Resets remind us of our fragility, but also of our belonging. We are not separate from the cycles of Earth, but part of them, temporary yet enduring, erased yet reborn. To live with this knowledge is to live humbly, to build not in arrogance, but in awareness. For one day, perhaps sooner than we wish, the Earth will change again, and our silence will join the others. But as long as even a fragment remains, as long as even one story survives, then we will not be forgotten. The myths that linger in human memory are not only about floods or fire, but about entire worlds erased, civilizations so advanced they became symbols of hubris and loss. Atlantis is the most famous. Plato described it as a great island civilization, wealthy, powerful, and ambitious, destroyed in a single day and night when the sea swallowed it whole. For centuries, people have debated whether Atlantis was a moral parable, a distorted memory, or a historical account. Yet what makes it compelling is not simply Plato's story, but the way it resonates with so many others. Atlantis is not unique. It is part of a global chorus of myths that remember lands and cities lost to the sea. In India, ancient texts tell of Dwarka, a city said to have been built by the god Krishna, its streets glittering like crystal, its palaces radiant. It too was swallowed by the ocean, remembered only in story until underwater ruins were discovered near modern Dwarka, lending weight to the legend. In the Pacific, Polynesian traditions recall islands that once stood above the waves but later sank, forcing their people to migrate. In the Caribbean, myths speak of cities drowned beneath sudden floods. Everywhere, the pattern repeats: prosperity, catastrophe, disappearance. The names change, but the structure remains the same. These stories may not describe one lost land, but many. The end of the last ice age 12,000 years ago raised sea levels by more than 100 meters. Vast coastlines were drowned, fertile plains vanished, and any settlements built there were erased. For the people who lived through it, the world would have seemed to collapse overnight. Their memories, carried through generations, became stories of lost homelands: Atlantis, Dwarka, Mu, Lemuria. Scholars often treat these as fantasy, yet when viewed alongside geological reality, they read like cultural memories of real events, mythologized but rooted in truth. Plato's Atlantis may have been inspired by Egyptian stories of earlier catastrophes. Some researchers connect it to the eruption of Thera, Santorini, around 1600 BCE, which destroyed much of the Minoan civilization. Others link it to the flooding of coastlines at the end of the Ice Age. Still others suggest it is a synthesis of multiple memories compressed into one story. Whatever its source, Atlantis symbolizes a deeper truth: that civilizations can fall suddenly, erased not by time alone, but by catastrophe. And Atlantis is only one voice among many. The Aztecs believed they lived in the Fifth Age, following 4 earlier worlds, each destroyed in turn. One ended in water, another in fire, another in wind, another in darkness. Each time humanity was nearly erased, only to begin again. Hindu cosmology describes vast cycles of time, yugas, in which worlds rise and collapse endlessly. Norse mythology tells of Ragnarok, where gods and giants clash, fire consumes the world, and then the earth is reborn, green and fertile. Native American traditions recall endings by ice, by fire, by flood. In every corner of the globe, the same rhythm appears: destruction followed by renewal. The persistence of these myths suggests that resets are not just stories, but memories. Survivors retold them to preserve lessons, to warn future generations, to make sense of loss. Over centuries, they became myth, shaped by culture and belief, but beneath them lies history, the human experience of catastrophe. The similarity across oceans and continents is too striking to ignore. It is unlikely that so many cultures invented the same kinds of destruction by chance. Far more likely is that they remembered, each in their own words, the resets that shaped their ancestors' lives. Even when myths are symbolic, they carry echoes of reality. A story of fire from the sky may recall an asteroid impact. A tale of endless night may echo a volcanic eruption. A flood myth may reflect the drowning of coastlines. Myths are not literal histories, but poetic memories, refracted through generations. To dismiss them entirely is to silence the voices of survivors. To listen is to hear the faint record of resets that archaeology cannot fully reveal. And myths do more than remember. They warn. They remind us that collapse is possible, that no civilization is eternal. The story of Atlantis is not only about wealth and ambition, but about fragility. It tells us that even the greatest societies can vanish overnight, leaving only ruins and stories. The myths of cycles in Hindu or Aztec tradition teach that destruction is not the end, but part of a pattern, that renewal follows catastrophe. They offer hope as well as caution, telling us that survival is possible, that humanity endures even when worlds fall. In our own time, these myths still resonate because they reflect our deepest fears and our oldest experiences. We fear rising seas, just as our ancestors did. We fear fire from the sky, just as they did. We fear collapse, just as they did. And we, like them, tell stories to preserve memory. Our films, novels, and warnings may one day become the myths of another age, echoes of our anxieties and our wisdom, carried forward by survivors who will retell them as legend. If resets are real, then Atlantis and its kin are not fantasies, but cultural fossils, preserved not in stone, but in story. They remind us that memory does not depend only on writing or artifacts. It depends on voices, on the determination of survivors to carry their experience into the future. Myths are the oldest archive of humanity, fragile yet enduring, shaped by loss yet filled with resilience. To hear them is to hear our ancestors telling us, "We have been here before, and we endured." You can too. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson of Atlantis. Not that it was one city lost to the sea, but that it stands for all the worlds erased by resets. It is a symbol of fragility, but also of continuity. For even when cities drown, stories float. Even when civilizations collapse, memory survives. And through that memory, the cycle continues, not only of destruction, but of renewal, of life finding its way forward again. If Atlantis and other flood legends remind us of fragility, the Earth's geology reminds us of inevitability. For resets are not rare. They are woven into the very fabric of the planet. fire, flood, and ice have struck again and again, leaving scars in stone and memory alike. To study these cycles is to glimpse the pattern of destruction and renewal that has shaped life from the beginning. And it forces us to confront a sobering truth. Resets are not relics of the past. They are part of the future. Look to fire, the most dramatic of all. Volcanoes have erupted throughout history with a fury that reshaped entire regions. Tambora in 1815 darkened skies across the globe, triggering the year without a summer. Crops failed from Europe to Asia, famine spread, and societies trembled. Krakatoa in 1883 shattered the island, sent tsunamis racing across oceans, and filled the atmosphere with ash so thick that sunsets glowed blood red around the world. These were small compared to Toba, 74,000 years ago, which may have nearly erased humanity itself. Volcanoes are not merely local events. They are reminders that the Earth holds power vast enough to shake civilization to its core. Floods, too, have written their story in stone. At the end of the last ice age, as glaciers melted, massive walls of water burst forth when ice dams collapsed. In North America, the Missoula floods carved vast canyons in days, sweeping away everything in their path. Across Europe and Asia, coastlines shifted, rivers swelled, and seas rose more than 100 meters. Imagine living on those drowned plains, watching the ocean advance year by year, consuming fields and villages. For survivors, it was the end of the world, and their memories became the flood myths we still tell today. Ice itself has been the most relentless reset. For millions of years, the planet has cycled between glaciations and warm periods, vast ice sheets, kilometers thick buried continents, grinding mountains flat, pushing rivers aside, reshaping entire regions. When the ice retreated, it unleashed floods and changed climates. Any civilization unlucky enough to live in its path would have been erased as thoroughly as if it had never existed. And we know these cycles are not done. The Earth will freeze again, though whether in centuries or millennia we cannot say. Then there is the sky. Asteroids and comets still drift through space, and Earth is struck regularly by smaller ones. Most burn harmlessly in the atmosphere, but larger impacts are inevitable given enough time. 65 million years ago, an asteroid ended the reign of the dinosaurs. Could one not end ours? Even a strike a fraction of that size would collapse modern civilization, scattering survivors, leaving little behind. Myths of fire from the sky, of suns falling, may be echoes of such impacts remembered by ancient witnesses. When we place these forces together, fire, flood, ice, and sky, a pattern emerges. Life flourishes, civilizations rise, and then catastrophe sweeps the slate clean. Survivors rebuild, myths form, memory fades, and a new cycle begins. This rhythm is not fantasy. It is etched into geology, into myth, into the silence of history. And if it has happened many times before, it will happen again. This perspective changes how we see the present. We often imagine that our challenges, climate change, rising seas, resource depletion, are unique to us. But in a sense, they are echoes of what humanity has always faced. Our ancestors endured ice and flood, famine and fire. They carried memory through myth, built monuments to last, and passed fragments forward. We are their descendants, proof that survival is possible. Yet we are also vulnerable, bound by the same fragility that erased civilizations before us. It also changes how we see myth. The stories of destruction and renewal may not be metaphors, but guides. They teach us that collapse is not the end, that renewal follows catastrophe. They remind us to prepare, to remember, to carry fragments forward. The myths of cycles in Aztec, Hindu, or Norse tradition are not only stories but warnings. The world resets, and we must endure. Our monuments echo this awareness. The pyramids, Stonehenge, Puma Punku, Göbekli Tepe. Perhaps they were not only temples or calendars, but attempts to carve permanence into a fragile world. Their builders may have known that resets would come again. By shaping stone, they left messages for the future, hoping their memory would outlast fire, flood, and ice. That is why these monuments draw us so powerfully today. They are not just relics, they are voices, telling us that we are not the first, and perhaps not the last. Even in our own time, we build with the same impulse. We send spacecraft into the stars, carrying golden records engraved with images and sounds of Earth. We carve monuments into mountains. We bury time capsules. These acts are not only about pride, they are about survival of memory. We sense, as our ancestors did, that resets are inevitable, and we hope, as they did, that something of us will endure when the rest is gone. The lesson of resets is not despair, but humility. We cannot stop the earth from changing, nor can we halt the cycles of fire, flood, ice, and sky. But we can endure. We can prepare, adapt, and carry fragments of memory forward. That is what humanity has always done. That is why we are here. If resets are the rhythm of the planet, then survival is the rhythm of humanity. To live with this knowledge is to live differently. It is to recognize that our cities, however mighty, are fragile. It is to value memory, to preserve what we can in forms that last. It is to see myth not as fantasy, but as heritage, the voices of survivors who walked through fire and flood before us. And it is to understand that one day, perhaps sooner than we wish, the earth will change again. When it does, we will join the long chain of cycles, our age fading into silence, our fragments becoming the myths of those who follow. Resets are not the end of the story. They are the turning of the page. What matters is not that civilizations fall, but that life continues, that survivors endure, that memory finds a way forward. In this way, we are connected not only to the future, but to the forgotten past, bound together by the rhythm of destruction and renewal that defines the earth itself. If resets shape the distant past, they also cast a shadow across the present. For the same forces that erased earlier ages still move around us today, quiet but unrelenting. We are not separate from them. We are living on borrowed time between catastrophes. This does not mean doom is inevitable tomorrow, but it does mean the cycle is not finished. The earth has never promised permanence, only change, and we are as vulnerable to that change as any who came before. One of the most pressing threats is climate itself. Our civilization flourishes in a rare window of stability, a span of roughly 10,000 years since the last ice age when temperatures were steady, seas were calm, and seasons predictable. It was in this window that agriculture, cities, and technology all emerged, yet this stability is not guaranteed. Already we see seas rising, storms intensifying, deserts spreading, and ice sheets thinning. Even without sudden catastrophe, gradual change can destabilize societies. A shift of a few degrees can turn fertile land to dust, flood coastal cities, and force migrations of millions. In such a world, collapse would not come with fire from the sky, but with hunger, conflict, and abandonment. To future ages, our cities might be remembered as drowned ruins, our achievements as stories of a golden age swallowed by rising seas. Another threat comes from above. Asteroids and comets cross Earth's orbit constantly. Most are small, burning harmlessly in the atmosphere, but some are large enough to cause regional or global devastation. History shows us that impacts have reset life before, most famously in the extinction of the dinosaurs. We track near-Earth objects with growing vigilance, yet we cannot control them. A rock a kilometer wide would be enough to end global civilization, plunging the planet into a winter of dust and ash. Survivors, if any, would scatter, their memories reshaped into myths of suns falling from the sky. To imagine this is not fantasy, but inevitability given enough time. In geological terms, it is not a question of if, but when. Then there is the threat from within. Our own technology, powerful and transformative, carries risks as great as nature's. Nuclear weapons hold the power to darken skies and poison lands, mimicking the very effects of asteroid impacts or supervolcanoes. Biological weapons and engineered diseases could sweep across populations faster than any natural plague. Even artificial intelligence and uncontrolled technologies may one day alter civilization in ways that lead to collapse. In each case, the danger is not only the destruction itself, but the fragility of the systems we depend on. If power grids fail, food chains break, and cities empty, our global civilization could unravel in decades. To those who follow, we might seem like a people who flew too close to the sun, undone by the very brilliance we created. Supervolcanoes, though rare, remain among the most formidable threats. Beneath Yellowstone, beneath Indonesia, beneath regions across the planet, vast chambers of magma wait in silence. Their eruptions in the past have altered climates for centuries, filling skies with ash, starving populations, and reshaping ecosystems. If one erupted in our time, global agriculture would collapse, trade would falter, and billions could perish. Survivors would live in a world of ash and cold, carrying memories of fire and darkness into story. 10,000 years later, archaeologists might see the silence in the record and wonder what happened, unaware that our age had ended in a single eruption. Some dangers are quieter, but no less profound. The slow depletion of resources, the exhaustion of soil, the collapse of biodiversity. These are pressures that build until societies strain and fracture. History shows us again and again that civilizations collapse not only from sudden shocks, but from gradual erosion. The fall of the Mayans, the ancestral Puebloans, or even Rome was hastened by such pressures. For us, the scale is global. The forests, the oceans, the atmosphere itself, all are strained. If these systems falter, collapse may come not with a bang, but with a long unraveling, a reset by attrition rather than by fire. It is sobering to recognize that we live in an age when all these threats converge. Natural cycles of the earth continue. Celestial hazards remain. And on top of them, we have created dangers of our own making. To live now is to live at the intersection of natural and human fragility, balanced on the edge of forces greater than ourselves. From this perspective, our confidence in permanence seems misplaced. We are not beyond resets. We are embedded in their rhythm, whether we admit it or not. Yet within this recognition lies both fear and hope. Fear, because we understand how easily our age could be erased, leaving only fragments for the future. Hope, because resets have never been the end of the story. Humanity has survived ice, fire, and flood before. We carry resilience in our very being. Each collapse in the past has been followed by renewal. Each silence has given way to rebirth. If we are swept away, it will not be the end but another turn of the cycle, another chance for survivors to rebuild, to carry fragments of memory into the future. This perspective also gives us responsibility. If resets are inevitable, then what matters is what we choose to preserve. Our stories, our knowledge, our warnings, these may be the fragments that survive us. Just as myths carried the memory of floods and fires, perhaps we can plant memories for those who come after. We can carve messages in stone, send records into space, create myths designed to endure. If future civilizations rise, they may look back at us as we look back at Atlantis, puzzled and curious. What they find will depend on what we leave behind. Resets remind us of humility, but they also invite us to think beyond our own time. We are temporary, yes, but we are also part of a long chain of survival stretching back through forgotten ages. To understand this is to see ourselves differently, not as the pinnacle of history, but as one chapter among many, fragile yet resilient, fleeting yet significant. And perhaps that is enough. To endure for a time, to carry memory forward, to leave something for the future. That is what it means to live within cycles. As we face the present with its converging dangers, the myths of the past speak more loudly than ever. They tell us that collapse is possible, that renewal follows destruction, that memory matters. They remind us not to cling blindly to permanence, but to prepare for change, to carve what we value into forms that can survive resets. For one day, the cycle will turn again. When it does, our silence will join the silences of the past. But if even a fragment of us endures, if even one story is carried forward, then we will remain part of the great rhythm of humanity. A rhythm not of endings, but of survival. At the edge of this long journey, we return to the central question. What if Earth has been reset thousands of times? The evidence is not laid out in perfect clarity. It comes as fragments, ruins half buried in the earth, myths whispered across oceans, anomalies in maps and artifacts, silences in the record. To skeptics, these are curiosities, coincidences, mistakes. To those willing to look deeper, they form a pattern, a rhythm that suggests history is not a single line, but a spiral, rising and collapsing, erasing and renewing. The truth may be that we are not the first, not the only, and not the last to walk this path. To imagine this is to feel both small and immense. Small, because it strips away the illusion of permanence. We are not the pinnacle of history, only a chapter in a story much older than we can grasp. Our cities, our machines, our digital worlds, all are fragile. They can vanish as quickly as Atlantis, as silently as the Indus, as mysteriously as the Maya. In deep time, permanence does not exist. The earth is a restless canvas, and what we paint upon it is temporary. And yet we are also immense, because even in the face of resets, humanity endures. Each cycle that came before must have had survivors. Each silence must have contained voices determined to carry memory forward. We are proof of that resilience. We exist because countless others endured. And that means those who follow may exist because of us. What, then, should we do with this knowledge? Perhaps the first step is humility. to see ourselves not as eternal, but as fragile participants in a larger rhythm, to recognize that our technology, however dazzling, is not immune to the forces of fire, flood, ice, and sky, to live with awareness that collapse is possible, that silence can follow us, that memory is fragile. But humility need not mean despair. It can also mean responsibility. If resets are inevitable, then what matters most is what we choose to preserve. Imagine the survivors of a future collapse. They huddle around fires, telling stories of towers that touched the clouds, of ships that sailed the stars, of glowing screens that connected the world. To them, these will sound like myths, as impossible as Atlantis sounds to us. But perhaps they will also find fragments, ruins of stone, carvings in mountains, spacecraft drifting in the void. Those fragments will shape their understanding, just as Göbekli Tepe, Stonehenge, and the pyramids shape ours. What we leave behind may one day become their myths, their anomalies, their puzzles. The question is, will those fragments carry our wisdom, or only our vanity? Already we have begun to carve our legacy. We have sent golden records into space, inscribed with music and images of Earth. We have etched knowledge onto metal plates designed to last thousands of years. We have built monuments in stone, carved faces into mountains, raised towers that might crumble but whose foundations could remain. These are our attempts to defy the erasing hand of time, to leave something for the future. Whether they endure depends on forces beyond our control. But the impulse is ancient, shared with those who carved megaliths, who raised pyramids, who built circles of stone. It is the same impulse that drives survivors to tell stories so their children will remember. It is humanity's way of fighting silence. Perhaps that is the final lesson of resets, that survival is not only physical, but cultural. Bodies may endure, but without memory, without stories, without knowledge carried forward, each cycle begins from nothing. To survive resets truly is to preserve fragments that can guide the future. Our myths, our monuments, our artifacts, they are not just curiosities. They are lifelines thrown across time. And if earlier civilizations did the same, then we are their heirs, living proof that fragments can outlast silence. As we stand in our fragile present, surrounded by machines and towers, it is tempting to believe we are different, that we have escaped the cycle. But the Earth reminds us otherwise. Volcanoes still breathe, asteroids still pass, seas still rise, climates still shift. The forces that erased the past still surround us. We cannot stop them, but we can live with awareness. We can prepare, adapt, and preserve. We can carve our stories into forms that last, seed myths with memory, leave messages for the future. If resets come again, as they surely will, then what survives will not be our wealth or our machines, but our fragments, our voices, our determination to endure. And in that endurance lies hope. For resets are not only about endings, they are about beginnings. Each collapse is followed by renewal. Each silence gives way to song. The story of humanity is not one of steady progress, but of resilience, of survival against odds, of memory carried across fire, flood, and ice. We are not unique in this. We are part of it. We are the latest flame in a chain that has burned, been extinguished, and rekindled countless times. And that chain may stretch into the future as long as there are people to survive, to remember, to begin again. So when we look at ruins and myths, at anomalies and silences, we are not only looking at the past, We are looking at ourselves, at what we may one day become. We are looking at the rhythm that binds all ages together. The earth resets, humanity endures, memory survives, and the story continues, not in permanence but in resilience, not in certainty but in renewal. Perhaps that is enough. Not to escape the cycle, but to participate in it. Not to cling to eternity, but to ensure that something of us endures when silence comes again. In this way, we are not only the children of forgotten worlds, we are their continuation, their voice carried forward. And one day, long after our own age has vanished, we too will whisper through fragments and myths, telling the future that we were here, that we lived, that we endured.